Would you be willing to do the Pledge of Allegiance this
I'd
morning?
love to.
Okay. Madam Clerk, you ready? Cool. Good morning, everyone. We will call to order the Friday, June 2nd meeting of the Ventura County Transportation Commission. If you will please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll ask Vice Chair to lead us in that.
Everyone, please stand if you're able and join me. Hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. That will take us to the roll call, and I'm glad I got it in the right order this morning so the clerk didn't chastise me. I'm teasing. Madam Clerk, if we have a roll call, please.
Yes. Chair McDonald.
Here.
Vice Chair Levere. Here. Commissioner Broggie. Here. Commissioner Chavez.
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Crosswhite. Here. Commissioner Enegren.
Here.
Commissioner Engler.
Here.
Commissioner Fancina. Commissioner Gorel. Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Judge.
Here.
Commissioner Long. Commissioner Lopez. Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune.
Here.
Commissioner Parvin. Commissioner Tremblay.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
No Board of Supervisors should be compensated to attend this meeting.
Thank you very much. And just as a matter of housekeeping, because we do have a commissioner calling in on the phone, all votes today will be by roll call. So this takes us to item number 4, public comments on items not on the agenda. This will be the time for someone to speak on any issue under the purview of this commission, but which is not agendized. At this time, I don't have any requests to speak on that section, but if anybody would wish to do so, now would be the time to come forward and ask. Okay, seeing none, that will take us to item number 5, Caltrans report. Director Roberts.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair McDonald, Commissioners, and Executive Director Erickson. And also I see in the audience past Executive Director Kettle. It's great to see you this morning. Here at Caltrans, we are busy finishing our fiscal year delivery of projects that we are packaging to advertise for construction in the latter half of 2023. And so work continues on our 11 emergency contracts within Ventura County. We have 11 contracts that are totaling $46.8 million of construction capital. And the closure on Ven 33, we expect to be able to do the repairs and have that reopen in the spring of 2024. So it's going to take some work, but we do have a contractor on board that's working as much as possible. We're also expecting, with the changing tide of seasons, that we're expecting reports of El Nino and a very, very hot summer. And so at this time, crews are also working on our vegetation management control plans in order to really clear areas of brush so that we can reduce any chances of potential wildfires that may happen and during the summer as the hot season comes up online. We also, in this past week, have been very busy because Congress has just passed a debt ceiling bill, and we received information that unobligated federal CRISA coronavirus relief funds will be rescinded soon. And so in an effort to provide the best chance for saving the obligated funds, Caltrans headquarters has been working with all of the local cities and counties to gather requests for state-only funds to be submitted to our California Transportation Commission for programming. And we have CTC has scheduled a special meeting for today at 2 p.m. to make programming changes so that the CRISA funds can be adjusted for state-only fund projects. For Ventura County, there's 8 projects totaling $3.97 million of obligated federal non-STIP CRISA funds. And so those are portions of those funds that we're trying to transfer to only state-only funding as much as we can through the CTC special meeting this afternoon. So we will be keeping the board and Director Erickson apprised of any developments as they come. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for our Caltrans representative? Seeing none? No? Thank you. Excellent job. Takes us item number 6, commissioners or executive director reports. Do the commissioners have any reports they would like to offer at this time? No? Mr. Erickson, it's your turn.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. Chair McDonald, happy second day of June. Still a little overcast for June, but as Acting Director Roberts noted, we may be moving into a warmer summer. You have my executive director's report in front of you. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points. As Acting Director Roberts noted, we have been working very closely with Caltrans staff in order to try to secure this CRISA funding, which was really the last segment of the COVID transportation funding that was that was allocated by this commission back in January of 2022. I had just mentioned January in the executive director's report, so that was actually January 2022 when we were told that we would have this money up until January 2024 to use. Now, clearly, in the ensuing discussions on the debt ceiling, the federal government is now trying to rescind that money. We are, again, doing everything we can to work with the cities where this funding could be lost to see if there's some way we can save it, and we will keep you informed of that. But I do want to acknowledge Peter DeHaan of my staff and Heather Miller for the work they were doing with all the city managers and the city public works staff and Caltrans staff, our partners, to try to preserve this money. Next slide. Last week, on May 23rd, it was Ventura County Public Works Day, and I wanted to let you know that VCTC had a big presence there with our FSP tow truck. You can see it on the right, our VCTC intercity bus, along with, it seemed like the entire apparatus of Ventura County, from the sheriff to Public Works Department, heavy trucks. This was an event that was last done in person in 2019 and involved many of the local schools, young school children from kindergarten up through 5th grade doing tours. And as you can see, the kids were very excited about the FSP truck and what it could do on the freeway. And that's our own Avi Castillo of VCTC staff, and a picture on the left showing people the VCTC intercity bus. So many kids were able to board the bus and look at the fare box and see the different ways to use transit. Next slide. Another big focus was bike safety, and I will note that is Commissioner White in the bike helmet and the the very bright jacket, who was joined by me in the bike safety booth. And we probably saw, I don't know, hundreds of young kids from many classes. We really emphasized the importance of wearing a helmet, even for short trips around. You may have noticed that for some people, helmets seem to be a little out of fashion, but we're trying to remind them how important wearing a helmet is for your safety. We are also able to pass out the VCTC Intercity Bike Map that you're familiar with and our bike riding guide. In fact, each of the children who were part of this had a goodie bag where our bike map and guide were included along with other county transportation information. So it was, I think, a very successful and busy day in that regard. Next slide. And finally, May was Bike to Work Month, as you know, and VCTC had a real presence, not only online, but in encouraging people to not just look at riding the bike on Bike to Work Day, but to make every day a day where you can look at using a bike in your mobility options. And with all the buses, Gold Coast buses, VCTC intercity buses being bike capable, it really is a time that I think we're finding people are open, especially young people, to make a trip using a bike. I know Darren Kettle's here today from Metrolink. We're seeing more bikes on trains, not just on Metrolink, but also on Amtrak and Losan trains. So I think it's part of that mobility puzzle that we're working to solve and find a way to get people on bikes for health, but also for the importance of preserving the environment and decreasing congestion and overall mobility. Next slide. And that is the end of my executive director's report for today.
Thank you, and I guess someday I'm hoping to see a picture of Director Kettle or Darren Kettle riding his bike to work in downtown Los Angeles. But we'll see if that happens or not. Any questions or comments for our executive director? Seeing none, thank you. Good job, sir. Takes us to item number 7, additions or revisions to the agenda. Do the commissioners have any requests to modify the agenda in any way, shape, or form?
Chair McDonald, we do have one item that needs to be modified.
Okay.
And Amanda Fagan will be presenting the minor edits to the recommendation on that item, which we'll read into the record.
Good morning, Chair McDonald and members of the Commission. We do have a couple of revisions. First, for item 8F, the US 101 Conejo Pass Wildlife Tracking Study Cooperative Agreement with the National Park Service. An attachment has been added containing the actual cooperative agreement with the National Park Service to complete the wildlife tracking study. For item 8G, the Motorist Aid Program Budget Amendment, the recommended action is revised very slightly to add approval of a transfer in to the general fund of $30,000 for the salary costs. The remainder of the recommended action does not change. So the revised recommended action is as follows. Amend the fiscal year 2022-2023 Motorist Aid Services budget by increasing the SAFE revenues by $44,800. Amend the fiscal year 2022-2023 Motorist Aid Services budget by increasing the communications line by $14,800, salaries line item by $13,200, fringe benefits by $4,800, and indirect costs by $12,000 for a total of $44,800. And finally, here's where the change comes in. Amend the fiscal year 2022-2023 Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies Safe Revenue Fund transfer out budget to the general fund by an increase of $30,000 for the salary costs and transfer in to the general fund of $30,000. And then finally, for item 11, the Santa Paula Branch Line Update Budget Amendment and Contract Award for Design and Environmental Compliance. There's also a small change to the text of the recommended action. It is also revised to correct the fund transfer language as follows. The recommended action as revised would be receive an update on the Santa Paula Branch Line railroad operations and damage sustained during winter storms in January 2023. Approve an amendment to the Santa Paula Branch Line program budget to increase expenditures by $492,000 in the consultant services category, increase salaries by $13,200, fringe benefits by $4,800, and indirect costs by $12,000, for a total increase in expenditures of $522,000, and increase the Santa Paula Branch Line STA transfer in revenues by $522,000. Also increase the STA fund transfer out into the Santa Paula Branch Line fund by $522,000. Transfer into the general fund from the Santa Paula Branch Line fund $30,000, and transfer out of SPBL fund into the general fund of $30,000. And finally, approve a contract with RailPros for design, engineering, and project management support services to reconstruct a portion of the Sespe Creek Overflow Railroad Bridge in an amount not to exceed $791,998. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments from the commissioners on that particular item?
I'd move approval of the agenda as revised.
Okay, for info consent?
Just to approve the agenda as
Oh, okay, I
with
see.
revisions.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Commissioner White. Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Broggie? Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Crosswhite? Commissioner Enegren? Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge? Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yes.
Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune?
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay? Commissioner White? Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Vice Chair Levere?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That will take us to item number 8, consent calendar. Do any of the commissioners request to pull any particular item for discussion? Okay, seeing none, then a motion would be in order, I'm sorry.
I'll move consent.
We have a motion by Commissioner Judge and a second by Commissioner Engler, and this is as amended, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Broggie? Commissioner Crosswhite?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren? Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge? Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez? Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune?
Yes.
Commissioner Parvin? Commissioner Tremblay? Commissioner White? Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Vice Chair Levere? Thank you.
Thank you all. That takes us to item number 9, our discussion calendar, fiscal year 2023-24, proposed budget. And we have Ms. Sally DeGeorge to do a presentation for us.
Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, it is a mouthful with this budget. I'll try to keep this brief because all the information is in the agenda, and we do have a full agenda today. But before you is item 9, the proposed fiscal year 2023-2024 budget. The fiscal year 23-24 proposed budget was reviewed by the Finance Committee on May 25th. After discussion and review, the Finance Committee recommended forwarding the budget as is to the full Commission for review. As you can see, this year's cover is promoting VCTC's public outreach activities, including our award-winning Buenas con VCTC project. But before we get into all the numbers, Martin is going to go over some of the updates of the state of transportation for both federal and state funding. Oops.
Thank you, Sally. And as we start this final approval of the budget, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the Administrative Finance Committee, Chair McDonald, Vice Chair Levere, and immediate past Chair Tremblay for the time they took to review and the very valuable input they provided us that is incorporated in this final budget before you. As you know, it's certainly the topic of the time, the federal funding situation, as the federal government moves toward what appears to be hopefully averting a financial debt ceiling crisis. But I wanted to touch briefly on the importance of the federal funding we have received since the beginning of the pandemic a little over 3 years ago. Now, most of that initial round or CARES funding has been spent already, but that funding, just to kind of, as I say before, sometimes there are so many different budgets we have here, but they're all linked in many ways, kind of a complex interdependence of funding. That CARES funding was very vital for us in our contribution as Metrolink member agencies, which you'll hear about later in the meeting. We'll continue to work, again, to try to preserve as much of this COVID transportation funding as we possibly can. And I think our hopeful, relationship with the federal government going forward and the infrastructure funding that was approved, the bipartisan infrastructure funding, the IIJA, is going to play a much larger role and a very needed role, especially in increasing the federal funding for our VCTC Intercity, as well as Gold Coast Transit and the other bus services in and across Ventura County. Next slide. The state picture, to use the old quote, change is the only constant, and all is flux. Which, if I remember correctly, was the Greek historian Heraclitus could not have said it better about the state budget right now, where we find just over a year ago a nearly $100 billion surplus has turned into a growing deficit estimated in the low 30 billions. As we've been updating you, this is very important for transit, especially the larger agencies in the state who are quite literally on a fiscal cliff in terms of their ability to keep providing service. The state budget is coming to a conclusion soon, but it does appear at this point that there still will be a shortfall of needed transit funding. We're hopeful, again, for the at least signs that some of the capital funding may be made more flexible, which will help us, but will help the larger transit agencies in the state to a greater degree. I think as we move out of the pandemic phase into the endemic phase of the COVID experience, as I said before, public transit emerges in a different place with questions about where, when, and if ridership will recover completely to pre-COVID levels. It's happening more quickly in bus transit operations like Gold Coast Transit or any intercity services, but for the commuter type lines, whether it's the Capital Corridor or Metrolink or other rail agencies like that, ridership is still struggling. So I think it's going to be very important that we look at the resources we have and how we can meet the needs, people's mobility needs in our community. And I'm very grateful for my team, and I think the collective efforts that we're seeing across Ventura County, from Gold Coast Transit and some of their initiatives to Moorpark and their micro-transit bus service. We really, I think, to coin a phrase, if we can become a center for excellence for some of the new strategies that are going to be necessary to help meet this need, I'm excited about that, and we're hoping that the state can be a partner with us. It might not be a big financial partner in the immediate future, but we're hopeful that can come back too. But fairly high level overview, but I do want to just again acknowledge Sally and her financial team and the whole VCTC staff for helping keep VCTC in a very solid financial position. I would say I would stack us up against any agency right now as in terms of the position that we are at under the circumstances that we're facing. So sometimes you can learn a lot from a smaller agency, and I think we are that case right now. Thanks, Sally.
Okay, so as we jump into the numbers and discuss the VCTC budget, it's important to remember a couple of things, and it's important to understand where VCTC's revenues come from and how the use of the revenues differ from cities and counties, being a special agency. So VCTC has no dedicated transportation funding, and therefore all our revenues are dependent upon federal and state programs and some local contributions and fees. VCTC revenues are restricted use funds, each with a specific set of regulations, making it difficult, if not impossible, to transfer these funds between uses. Unlike cities, VCTC has no ongoing general fund revenues that can be used to backfill shortfalls across its various activities. The budget consists of approximately 25% of federal funding at $22.7 million. That's an increase of $5.3 million from the draft budget. The state portion is about 70%, or $64.4 million, which is about $200,000 higher than the draft budget, largely due to LCTOP funding to increase the free ride programs. And then the local funding shakes out at about 5% or $5.1 million, and it's about a $30,000 increase from the draft budget for local funds within the Valley Express budget. But as you can see, a significant portion of our budget is state funding. So in fiscal year 23-24, our balanced budget is just over $109.3 million, or just under, sorry, $109.3 million. It's divided into 6 programs to keep Ventura County moving by creating a more connected, resilient, equitable, and user-friendly transportation system. This proposed budget is approximately $5.3 million higher than the current fiscal year, higher than the draft budget, largely due to additional FTA pass-through funding to local agency projects. This final budget is $2.8 million higher than the current fiscal year. Many of the year-over-year changes from 22-23 were captured with the draft budget presentation in April and can also be found within the agenda item and, of course, the budget itself. In the next few slides, I'm going to explain the major changes from the draft budget. With personnel, VCTC employs a small but capable staff that provides support to the region. The final personnel costs are very similar to the draft budget, with the final cost being about $1,200 lower than the draft budget. As a recap of the personnel costs, salary and benefits are about $4.1 million or 3.8% of the budget. It includes 24 full-time positions, 1 new position, a senior accountant position that is fully burdened to support growing state and federal requirements, timely support to the other departments, and to increase our internal controls. $1,000 increase in insurances, and about $2,000 for an OPEB contribution increase. I do want to remind the Commission that currently it's estimated that our pension funding level is about 96.9%, and our OPEB funding level is 106.9%. Which is great news. Unfortunately, last year was a bad investment year, and so what that means is when our next valuation is done and all the actuaries calculate our numbers, our funding level will go down. It will, I'm estimating, but I'm not an actuary, will be in the mid to high 80%, so that is still good, not as good as this, but we will still be in a relatively good position. Part of that, especially with the with both the pension and the OPEB, is the Commission's support of VCTC of trying to pre-fund both our pension and our OPEB. With our OPEB, it's a trust that we've had since 2009 that we have been pre-funding, and that's why we're in such good shape there. And the Commission has also been supportive of additional discretionary payments to CalPERS to make sure that our pension costs are covered with our pre-funding so that the funds we have now can support our projects now. The Transit and Transportation Program at $29.1 million or 27% of the budget contains 5 budget tasks that help the Commission to prioritize transportation projects, transit technology, and state and federal funding to better serve our community. The significant change from the draft budget was only found within one budget. Again, it's the Transit Grant Administrative budget, where it increased about $5.2 million, and that money is all for pass-through projects to our local agencies, which results in about a $1.1 million change from the prior year because there were completed projects in 22-23. The Highway Program at $5.6 million or 5% of the budget contains 2 budget tasks that are for capital and planning projects that VCTC implements, co-partners, and or oversees for the county. The significant change from the draft budget was found within the motorist aid service budget with an increase of about $53,000 in support of communication costs for our call boxes, which leaves about just under $300,000 year-over-year change from the prior year. The increases that were discussed were at the draft budget, just to recap, were for additional costs for an additional freeway service patrol beat, as well as a 3rd incident responder grant program. Within our rail program at $23.2 million or 21% of the budget, it contains 3 tasks which encompass the rail programs within Ventura County. The rail program provides safe and reliable transit alternatives for services going beyond the areas served by our buses. It also provides active transportation opportunities through a recreational multi-use path as part of the Santa Paula Branch Trail. There was only one significant change from the draft budget, and that's found within the Metrolink budget. It actually is a decrease from the draft of about $356,000 as adjustments to operating and capital projects were happened with the budget as we got our final estimates from SCRA. It is still an increase of about $728,000 year over year. I do want to point out it is a large budget. It includes about $10.8 million in capital projects with Metrolink, as well as $1.5 million for ADA improvements at the Camarillo Metrolink station. Our commuter assistance program at $948,000, or 1% of the budget, contains 2 budget tasks that encourage residents to use alternative modes of transportation. There was only one significant change from the draft budget. There was an additional about $57,000 for consultant staff costs related to the Mobility as a Service project, and resulted in a year-over change of about $87,000. The Planning and Programming Program at $48.9 million, or 45% of the budget, contains 5 budget tasks that focus on comprehensive countywide transportation planning and oversight to improve transit and transportation within our county. There were 2 significant changes from the draft budget. The first is found within our regional transit planning budget, an increase of about $175,000 for additional youth and free ride programs, resulting in a year-over-year increase of $510,000. And then the TDA administration budget has an additional $159,000 funds being passed through to local agencies as VCTC adjusted the needs for administration downward. In our general government program at $1.5 million, or 1% of the budget, consists of 3 budgets, tasks that administer and support the day-to-day activities of the Commission. There were no significant changes to these budgets with the final. So at the end of fiscal year 23-24, the $109.3 balanced budget leaves an estimated fund balance of $24.4 million. Funds available for general use can only be found within our general fund, with an estimated fund balance of about just under $1,400 with a reserve of $50,000. Within our restricted fund balances, the local transportation fund will have an estimated fund balance of about $354,000. The state transit assistant budget will have about $22.2 million, with anticipated uses being for delayed cash flow purposes when we have delayed grants, both state and federal, as well as potential capital purchases, which in the future could include Metrolink capital projects and VCTC intercity buses, but any capital projects that might be needed by the Commission and our constituents, as well as implementing the recommendations out of the Transit Integration and Efficiency Study, commonly called TIES. Our Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies fund balance will be about $1.6 million, with anticipated future uses being for additional freeway service patrol routes as needed, as well as additional incident responder grants. Our State of Good Repair fund balance will be about $109,000, and our Santa Paula branch line will be about $25,000. So again, I would like to remind the Commission and the public that the Finance Committee did meet on May 25th to review and discuss the proposed 23-24 balanced budget. They recommended forwarding the budget as is presented to the full Commission for review and approval. All staff is here to answer, is available and happy to answer any questions you may have about the changes from the draft or changes year over year. And as a reminder, staff's recommendation are to conduct a public hearing to receive testimony of the fiscal year 23-24 budget, adopt the fiscal year 23-24 salary schedule, which is attachment 1 to the item, as well as Appendix C in the fiscal year 23-24 budget, effective July 1st, 2024, July 2023, and adopt by resolution the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget. And again, we are happy to answer any questions that we may not have covered.
Thank you. Before I go to the Commission for any questions, I think I'd like to open and conduct a public hearing to receive testimony on the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget. If anyone wishes to provide testimony, please fill out a speaker card, come forward and provide your testimony. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And now we will go to Commission questions or comments for Ms. DeGeorge. Commissioners have any comments? Commissioner Tremblay.
Hey, there we go. Not so much comments as kudos, just for a moment or two. Great kudos to Sally and her staff on a budget presentation, and kudos to the chair and our incoming chair for I wasn't able to be at the meeting last week because of illness, although I will say the Admin and Finance Committee went over this budget with a fine-tooth comb preceding the presentation of the draft budget. And I will tell you that Sally's presentation has been responsive in all respects to the issues that we raised. I think my sense, I've only sat on this commission for a few years, but I think the quality and the clarity of the budget presentation has significantly increased in the last few years, so I really want to praise Sally for her efforts. I think I'm not one that just randomly wants to add positions, but I think the senior accounting position is fully justified given the complexity of the restricted funds and the burden on Sally and existing staff. So when the time is appropriate, Mr. Chair, I'll move adoption of the budget. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments by any of the commissioners? Commissioner Long.
I just really agree with Commissioner Tremblay in regards to the great presentation. And the importance of each line item is actually the wonderful things we get to do for our community. It really dovetails quite nicely, and I don't think it's very frivolous. It's very thoughtful, and appreciate all the team's work in doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to take this opportunity to especially thank my staff for all their hard work, but all of VCTC staff, because though I may do some of the heavy lifting on the budget itself, it really is the full staff doing the individual budgets and making sure that we get the projects done for you and for our constituents. So thank you.
Commissioner Crosswhite.
There may not be much of an answer to this at this point, but what impact do we think that the uncertainty of the governor's budget might have on the agency in the next 1 to 2 years?
So maybe Martin and I'll both do it. I'll do the first year that we're talking about here. I think VCTC is in a very good position, at least for 23-24. A lot of our funding is grant secured. I mean, just like the federal government pulling back the federal funding, that could happen to us too with state money. But I think for 23-24, we're in very good position, that our funding is pretty secure. The economy could change. I don't have a crystal ball. Beyond that, it gets a little fuzzier, and I think I'll let Martin address past the first year. See if his crystal ball's better.
I've said before I may have shared with a few of you that having foresight is less common than hindsight, but far more valuable. And I think, as Sally noted, I'm grateful for VCTC's relative financial position. Definitely concerns about the state and its provision of transit funding going forward, and to the extent that affects especially our regional partnerships, whether it's Metrolink or LoSan, or just ongoing transit funding statewide, and operating as well as capital. But as we talked about when we did our strategic plan, and it was adopted in April, VCTC is based on partnerships. So I think the strength of our partnerships, whether it's with all the individual cities or with Gold Coast, with Caltrans, with the Port of Hueneme, will help us to weather this. But I try to be an optimist going forward in this. I think it was Madeleine Albright who said I'm an optimist, but I worry a lot. So that's kind of how I feel about the state budget right now. But again, I'm really grateful for the commission for its leadership in this, and my team as we move forward to tackle it.
Okay. Not seeing any other comments. Commissioner Tremblay, you offered a motion. Are you still willing to do so?
Yes, move the recommended motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Tremblay, a second by Commissioner Judge. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Broggie? Commissioner Chavez? Commissioner Chavez? Commissioner Crosswhite?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren? Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge? Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez? Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune?
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay? Commissioner White?
A resounding yes.
Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lavere.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. That takes us to item number 10, Metrolink update, or also known as the Darren Kettle Show.
And I think you did my job for me. I'm here just to introduce Darren. Thank you.
I think that's a sign that our chair misses you, Darren.
It's a kind introduction. Nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be back in these chambers. It's been about a year, the last time I was here, to share a little bit about what's going on at Metrolink. Again, I'm Darren Kettle. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Southern California Regional Railroad Authority, more commonly known as Metrolink. It is nice to be here, and just to speak to the chair's comments about me biking in downtown Los Angeles. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen, but I would encourage you to check out our LinkedIn profile. Most recently, we posted Metrolink's CEO riding a bicycle on a beach in Oxnard, where he was talking about the $15 summer day pass at Metrolink that you can now have starting Tuesday of this week, that you can ride anywhere in our system for $15 on any day. So, and on weekends, $10. Yes, and this also goes to Commissioner White, who gives me a lot of business about riding bicycles as well, but there is video proof that I actually did it most within the last couple of weeks. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right.
Quick question for you. Was it a two-wheeled bicycle or a four-wheeled bicycle?
Three. No,
Three.
it was, yeah. And I was wearing my helmet, Mr. Erickson, I promise you. So let's go ahead and we'll jump into the slide deck. This is, there'll be a little bit of overview about Metrolink, but also talking, because you've just passed your budget. Again, it is so great to continue to see Sally DeGeorge just absolutely hit grand slams every time with this budget. I had the privilege of working with her for 13 and a half years, and as was mentioned, it gets better and better and better each time. So let's go to the next, here you go, got it. So a little bit about Metrolink. First of all, we are a system that serves 6 counties. We have 5 member agencies, of course, VCTC being one of them, with Director Tremblay and Director Chavez serving on the Metrolink board. We have 7 different lines in our system, and we're now at 547 route miles. We're the 3rd largest passenger railroad in the country. A lot of people don't realize just how large that is, but we compete with places like Chicago and New York and Boston as far as our service territory. Our highest ridership lines are the Antelope Valley line and the San Bernardino line, along with the Orange County line. That's all great, but the line that's most near and dear to my heart is the Ventura County line, due in part to the fact that I'm on it 2 or 3 days a week as the CEO, but also a rider of the system. We do serve as far south as Oceanside in San Diego. Of course, you may have been hearing quite a bit over the course of the last 6 to 7 months about the challenges of getting through San Clemente due to landslide issues. Again, we were pleased to announce over the last weekend, that we were able to restore service both for Metrolink as well as Pacific Surfliner that allows passenger riders to get all the way to San Diego. One of the things I hope this commission will recall from the time when I served as its executive director, that sometimes you really have to be prepared to own your stuff. We are at a point coming out of the pandemic that the very nature of the commute and how we work has fundamentally changed. At Metrolink, we were formed in 1992 as a commuter railroad. We ran peak hour trains in the morning and peak hour trains at night, and we then took them to our central maintenance facility where we took care of them. Well, that kind of system where you're dealing with only commuters is, that day has left us. We have to be real honest with the nature of what we can do as a railroad. So when I talk about where we are, and I apologize for the lack of clarity in this slide, but commuter railroads across the country have all been impacted by a very new phenomenon known as work from home. And the fact, and by new, it's 3 years old at this point, but it has fundamentally changed how any sort of commuter operation works. And I think even this body saw it with its VCTC intercity service on some of the lines where ridership, particularly for white-collar professionals, were able, and we learned to work from home. This slide will show you about where Metrolink is. We're at about 42% of our pre-pandemic ridership. We're not alone in this. Most of the urban metropolitan regions in the country, with the exception of New York and Boston area, have hovered around the 50% ridership recovery on a regular basis. We're creeping up every little bit. We're at about, this slide's a couple months old now. This is January 2023. We're at about 44 to 45% of pre-pandemic ridership. And I think you can see some of our sister agencies. Caltrain is the service that serves Mr. Mattis's home territory of the Bay Area between San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. They're still at about 36% of pre-pandemic ridership. And of course, if you have a conversation with BART, you'll hear about their numbers as well. So I think part of what we're having to do at Metrolink is own who we are as a railroad and start to pivot to being more than just a commuter railroad. Financial challenges ahead. You know, when we talk about ridership, that is revenue to us. Our riders used to cover as much as 40 to 45% of our fare revenue, of our operating costs, excuse me. We're down now around 13 to 14%. Again, that's something that we're no different than most railroads across the country, and certainly in California. We did benefit from COVID relief dollars. The majority of our operational costs are fixed. When you operate a railroad over 547 miles, you have to take care of tracks, signals, switches, the right-of-way across the corridor, large equipment. That's not stuff that goes away when you even reduce some levels of service, because you still have to take care of the right-of-way, you still have to take care of the equipment. And we are, like was mentioned, Mr. Erickson mentioned the fact that there is this, we're all approaching this operations fiscal cliff. And while we are in a position both with VCTC support, but through our member agencies, we have been able to get past that this year. We are not able to restore full service throughout our system, which was my board's original desire back in December. There was an effort to say, let's try to get back to full service to pre-pandemic levels. Given the nature of our system, our member agencies simply said, we're not able to afford that. And so we're working right now on our budget that will allow for us to keep current service levels. And I should real quickly add that in doing so, the nature of service in Ventura County actually in the last couple of years have seen improvements from where we were even at the beginning of the pandemic for a couple of different reasons. And thanks in part to the partnership VCTC has with LA County Metro, who is the funding partner for the Ventura County line. Right now, if you're not familiar, from East Ventura, there are 3 round trips. But then when you get to Moore Park, which is owned by VCTC, we have 5 additional round trips coming out of the Moore Park station. So that has been an improvement. And then working in partnership with Pacific Surfliner, we have added a couple of code share trains, which means you could use a Metrolink ticket, any Metrolink ticket, and be able to ride a couple of additional trains too. So there are more train options in Ventura County than there even was pre-pandemic. So I mentioned our current service level. That will be our budget. We are working on a program with Pacific Surfliner that I believe we're going to be able to do in the Ventura County line by the fall of this year, fingers crossed, where I'm calling it the Any Train program. You buy a Metrolink ticket and you can ride any train north of Los Angeles, whether it's our train or a Pacific Surfliner train. We already have an agreement in principle with Losan staff. We'll have to go to both of our boards, but that will be the ability to provide even more train options on the Ventura County line. It's going to be serving as a pilot project, and if it's successful, we're going to take it south of Los Angeles towards into Orange County. I'm going to talk a little bit about our ridership and our ridership forecast because it's something new for us, the way we've done it this year. Our expenses, generally, we're following our contractual obligated mandated increases. We are not adding to our head count. Our full head count is 285 public employees. That is not, of course, the only people that take care of our railroad. We have we use a contract model very similar to what VCTC does, in that our conductors and engineers, our Amtrak employees, the teams that take care of our right-of-way, the track signal, those are contractor employees, and the team that takes care of all of our equipment are also contractors. All told, we're at about 1,200 total contract employees at Metrolink. And then we have a regular reporting requirement with all of our member agencies. We're not sitting around waiting for things to happen, though. We have to recognize at Metrolink that, again, I mentioned earlier, we need to pivot to a different structure. We're already looking at ways to become more efficient and get more out of the crews we have out there today. We have several studies underway that we will be looking at. Results aren't in yet, but looking at opportunities to provide more service throughout the day using our existing crews at relatively modest cost. We're looking at a schedule integration study with Amtrak, Pacific Surfliner, and then recognizing that if you are not a commuter, what has ever made you think, I'm going to take the train? We're all Southern Californians. Born and raised in Southern California. The only reason that I really became familiar with Metrolink was because I used it for my commute from San Bernardino to Los Angeles in the mid-90s. We as Southern Californians, most of us, are not hardwired to say, I'm going to take the train today. So we have to identify those new riders to get them into our system. And what is it that makes them tick? How are they going to use a Metrolink train for that trip that is going to take them from Oxnard to Moorpark? Or is going to take them from Moorpark to Northridge? How are we going to identify college students that can use our trains to get to their universities, colleges, trade schools? You will see a program that we will be introducing in September that will allow us it's going to be a pilot project where any college student with an ID will be able to ride a Metrolink train for free. Now, it's not free. We have a grant that supports it, but it copies a program that VCTC started a few years ago, allowing for college students to ride buses throughout the Ventura County territory. So it was a success here. I'm hoping it'll be a success at Metrolink throughout our system. So it's we'll see how that plays out. And then more recently, we just got a grant to look at how we can get more efficiency out of our existing equipment, both from a fuel efficiency perspective, using technology, but also training our engineers to better utilize the equipment so that we maintain our on-time performance, but we also get our fuel cost is a big part of what we do. And so any efficiency we can get out of that, the wheel experience savings. All right, let's another honest conversation about ridership. When we built our budget for FY23, we had no idea what it was going to look like coming out of the pandemic. We had actually predicted ridership recovery in the mid-60s by the time we got to the beginning of this year. And of course, that was not realized. You know, at the beginning of this year, we were at that 42% number. So we, like a number of our sister agencies, brought in a consultant to give us some better forecasting information. So the yellow line you see there is the forecast that we are using for our budget for the next fiscal year 23-24, that you will see starts at about 42%. There's a really short little squiggly line to the left of this slide that shows our actual ridership. And of course, the longer yellow line is our forecast for the next fiscal year and going to out years. So right now we are tracking with that low forecast. And again, you know, we want to aspire, we do aspire for having better numbers than that. And we have a lot of work ahead of us to make that happen. Our operating budget, you will see here in round numbers about $250 million. The VCTC contribution to that is 16.3. And you will sort of see this will hopefully give you an idea about how Metrolink's funding structure works. The big green half of that pie is covered by LA County Metro. And so now granted, Los Angeles County is a really, really large place. They have a full 2-cent sales tax for transportation. They're able to put programs out there that support a variety of mobility options. They cover a lion's share of our operating costs. On the capital side, you will see this budget again, where we have a total budget for state of good repair of about $130 million, and a new capital in that $20 million range. The state of good repair for our railroad is probably our single greatest major investment that we have to make in our system. When VCTC bought what was then the Southern Pacific portion of the tracks from Moorpark to the county line, and not just VCTC, every one of the public agencies, LA Metro, San Bernardino, Orange, and Riverside, when they bought that right-of-way, they bought right-of-way and rail lines that were 40, 50, 60 years old already. So when we all purchased this, we bought old stuff. We bought very, railroads that had sort of walked away from some of the investment they needed to make in state of good repair. We've had to pick that up. The good news is that was referenced earlier, the IIJA has seen a significant increase, 40% increase prior to the last federal authorization, simply for state of good repair. So while we see our state of good repair budget going up, it is coming from revenues that we as Metrolink generate for the 5-county system. So it's good investment coming from the federal government to take care of our assets. And again, that's the reason we get that kind of money in this region, is because Metrolink operates. I'm going to touch real quickly on a new program that's going in our budget this year. We're still working through it. It's called our working capital program. Much like VCTC, Metrolink doesn't have any of its own money either. So I was really well trained going over to be the CEO at Metrolink because I was accustomed to not having my own money here at VCTC. So the working capital program, we do a lot of major projects in our system. We are doing more and more of those projects, but we don't have our own capital fund. We have had to use what I would consider, and I think most people in local government would consider, not the best business practice. We had to use operating funds to float ourselves for capital projects, 4 or 6 months to have to do that. So this year we are proposing to the 5 member agencies a capital reserve. It is with the 5 counties supporting a one-time investment into us creating a capital reserve in the amount of $50 million so that we have that reserve available to us so that we are not having to float with operating dollars. That is, we have generally had a positive response from that. We are still working with VCTC staff on getting all the details ironed out, along with the 4 other counties. My board will ultimately have to adopt a policy and a procedure for that capital reserve. But we've had a recognition that it's not the best business practice to be using operating dollars to float capital projects. And when I talk about that, we have capital projects that are, tens and 20 millions that on a monthly basis that we need to be prepared to make sure we're paying our contractors. And much as we did when I was at VCTC, it was critically important that we make sure we pay our bills on time. So that's something new for us at Metrolink. The budget summary. Again, all in, when you look at it, it's about a $450 million full budget. That includes the $50 million for the capital reserve that we're proposing. And assuming we get there, the total all-in contribution on the part of VCTC's 33.7 million. You can see the breakdown through the other 4 counties in our system covering those expenses. Without the capital reserve, historically, particularly in the last 5 years or so, we have hovered around $400 million in total budget between capital and operating. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will be happy to take questions. And thank you.
And I have to just say, being in my last year of my 60s, I'm a little perturbed that you call something 50 or 60 years old and worn out. But other than that, life is good. So, Commissioner Long, you have a comment.
Yes, thank you. I have great concern on the ridership, so low for 42. How do we partner with Metrolink to really get our ridership up? I'm thinking there's huge capacity since you only have 40%. Are we working with maybe creating some of the habits for our younger students, either going to a field trip? Is it the high school students knowing where to do it? Because so much is form of habit. I get in a car, I go here. I do that every day. But, how do I know how to get a ticket? How do I know where to get on and where to get off? Kind of like buses. But I think if you're at a 40%, maybe if you haven't considered it, maybe that's something. Because as a student, they're shy already, and then I don't know where to go. Do you have those marketing plans to state, this is a great adventure, here's the way to do it? You can get in the morning and come back in the afternoon, and it's only $10, or, things of that nature, especially with our economy the way it is, not everyone can afford. But if they can go on a fun-free excursion and it only costs me $10, they might rally their friends and say, hey, let's go do this. But I think that we need to understand how to use the train system better versus just there's a train. You know what I mean?
And I think when I took on this role nearly 2 years ago, this was the question. I don't think any of us really had an idea about what ridership was going to look like coming out of the pandemic. We had what was easy money in commuters. They bought monthly passes, away we went. So to your point, Supervisor Long, when we launched this program in September, I called it the College Student Pass Program. It is actually going to be available for any student. It will be free, and all you have to do is show your ID for school. We actually are calling it the Student Adventure Pass. So our job then will to be marketing that, and we will be asking the 5 counties in our system to do everything they can to put that out through social media. The focus is on college-age students, but we're going to take any student during this 6-month pilot to see how it first works out. But I think the biggest part of this is how we're going to communicate that to it, and we've already started the outreach to the colleges, universities, trade schools, that type of thing. So you're absolutely right, and I think that's how we capture the next generation. I've been preaching next generation at Metrolink, and so that'll be our opportunity. And I hope it is such a success that we have to figure out how to fund it past the pilot program.
Well, and I hope that we're reaching out to our community college districts, our high school districts. I mean, even the teachers are such the motivators, even our K through 8. There has to be some way they're looking for how do they get to their, what's it called? Their field trip, and they're thinking buses. But maybe there are ways to incorporate and work with our school districts to create those opportunities of growth. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Those are all great suggestions. We do everything we can to make the trains available. It was probably a year ago now. We had a music program from Ventura, the Ventura Unified School District. We had 110 students on. I always get on the same car when I take the train, and so I actually got on the car. And there were 110 students on that car. So I quickly went to another car, but I found 110 high school students that were going down for a music program that was going to be at the LA Symphony. And so those are the kinds of things that we continue to do that. We had another student program come in from San Bernardino a few weeks ago. So we continue to make that available. We continue to preach it. We hope that teachers will take advantage of it. It's a great deal. We continue to market it because I think that is our opportunity going, as Southern Californians, no disrespect to anybody, we're all lost causes when it comes to rail. A few of us are enlightened. I know Mr. White over there is already going, what do you mean, Mr. McDonald? Mr. Tremblay, of course, because he sits on my board. But those are the kinds of things we have to go after that next generation.
Any other comments for Director? I'll go to Commissioner White, Commissioner Brogate, and then Commissioner England.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's good seeing you there.
Likewise, Jim. Good to see you too.
Healthy and all that kind of stuff.
Something like that.
I really appreciate what Supervisor Long had to say. That is probably my biggest concern right now for not only people on the trains but buses too. How do you get that information out to these people? I was very fortunate to meet with Vanessa Rauschenberger last week, and I brought a couple of people from the Housing Authority over to Gold Coast, and they were just overwhelmed by, oh, you can do this, you can go there, you can get this. And these are people from the Housing Authority where people are transit dependent. So there's that group of people that are just dependent on transportation. How do you get that information out to those people? It is a habit, definitely. And how do you get them into that habit? But a couple of things I want to ask you, sir, is I really appreciate you working together with Losan. There's some ups and downs that happen from time to time, but I think Losan, it's a nice connection. And again, the marketing, how do you get new riders? I like the ideas that Supervisor Long brought in about going even to grade schools. It's fun to ride the The college student ride, that's great. I'm glad you finally got that for trains, because people have had that for cars, and again, Vanessa was nice enough to talk to the staff at the Housing Authority about, well, did you know? They didn't know. How do we get that information out? It's always a concern of mine. Safety. What's the safety? I mean, how is the trains doing in safety? You know, people say, well, I don't want to ride the bus because it's not safe. I don't want to ride the trains because it's not safe. I mean, are you doing anything regarding that, especially what's been going on lately?
So on the safety side, you know, we have our track record is quite strong. I mean, on the Metrolink system, and there's certain things, again, where I've said it before, we have to own our stuff, and we're all in this together when it comes to transit. Our riders, we do regular surveys, they see our trains as reliable, safe, clean. We're not perfect. We have issues that come up on certain places. The challenge, of course, is that when you get to certain other places, and there is a component of that last mile, and particularly in our system right now with some of the negative, unfortunately deserved negative publicity in Los Angeles, some of the challenges in the subway system there, that we all experience. I experienced yesterday, as recent as yesterday when I was on the subway. So there are concerns on that side of things. We have to keep working with LA Metro to make sure we convey what our riders are hearing, so they continue to try to raise their bar on the safety, and they are. They've made some concerted efforts in the last 2 months to try to improve safety on their system. So we have to continue doing that. Again, the Metrolink system, the nature of its ridership, the way that our system works, I'd put our safety record up, the sense of security against any regional railroad in the country.
Well, again, I think it is safe, and I've ridden it a couple of times, and taken the bike down to LA even, and riding on the train back. And it is safe, but how do we tell people that it's safe? How do we convince people that it's safe and get them in that habit, like Supervisor Long was talking about? So anyway, I appreciate you being here, and thanks for your report.
Thank you. Commissioner Broggie.
Am I on? Okay.
You're good.
I'm on. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Anyway, it really piqued my interest when you mentioned the college path. And I think for any youth, especially those that are living in the Santa Clara Valleys, in Fillmore, my city, or Santa Paula, and these kids, a lot of the kids don't have any way of actually ever leaving the Santa Clara Valley, and a lot don't. And I think, you know, with VCT's movement towards getting transportation to Moore Park, which is something that we're working on, but the idea of then being able to get onto a Metrolink train and go wherever they want to go, I think would be huge for certainly Fillmore, and I think I can speak on behalf of Santa Paula as well, that the youth there, it would be a monumental change for them in their lives and their perspectives. And so I think that's fantastic. So
Thank you. Yeah, we you know, again, as a regular user of the system, I see our ridership. I see college students getting on at getting on and off at Cal State Northridge. I see them actually transferring at Union Station to go to Cal State LA. And that's just for school. I think that the opportunity to use it as that adventure component is super important, because that's what's going to make them say it's a much bigger world out there than what generally a lot of young people experience in the friendly confines of Ventura County. And so I hope that they will take advantage of that opportunity. We'll see how it goes.
Very good. Very good, Commissioner. Commissioner Engler.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's always good to see you, Darren.
Likewise.
Good information. I think I have really two questions, and one revolves around ridership, and of course, we're struggling with the same issue on our bus systems here. You mentioned that the trend now is not toward peak commuting times and everything else. How are you addressing that and trying to spread that and attract more riders in that way? And then the second question is really, I love taking the train out of Moore Park, going down to Burbank, getting on a plane there. It's wonderful. I think like some of us, I'm challenged, though, for anything else other than something that brings me directly to it. How are you making that intermodal connection easier for folks like me?
So on the ridership question, this is going to be one of those areas, we have those concerns. And so the notion of what we're looking at with our schedule integration is, the part of this is better partnering with Pacific Surfliner. Right now, we currently have trains almost on top of each other in the morning heading into Los Angeles. And then we have a 4-hour gap. So if we do some work and figure out how we work better, particularly if we're able to pull off this, the AnyTrain program, is by moving our schedules around a little bit, allowing people to also take the Pacific Surfliner train, we end up serving all day long, and we don't have that 4-hour gap in either direction. The other component will be into the evening. Again, if I were to be in downtown LA and I want the last train out, I can catch it at 7:15. So I'd have to have a really, really early dinner if I was doing something in downtown LA to be able to then take a train home. So we're looking at those opportunities as well. So a big part of this, Commissioner Engler, is that notion of how do we serve not just the commute trip, but the discretionary trip, the other trip. And so we're hoping that the schedule adjustments that we're going to be looking at probably in the fall of this year and have been tested elsewhere. Chicago Metro just has done this. Boston has just recently done this, where they've modified their schedules away from all being in the peak. To Commissioner Long's point earlier, we are at a point where we have plenty of, when you only have 43% of your pre-pandemic ridership, there's plenty of empty seats. And during the depth of COVID, we had no problem with social distancing. It was not a problem on our trains. But we are now, it's like, okay, well then let's move these seats throughout the day. If we have the seat availability, let's move these seats throughout the day. What's happened in my experience is people have gotten really comfortable loving having a 4-seater section all to themselves. So which is something pre-pandemic people actually have to share seats or share spaces. So we're going to have to work through some of those types of things. So I think we're, on that front, that's how we're going to try to hit that, again, the ridership, to try to bring in more riders. I'm sorry, I should have taken notes on your second question.
Well, the second question really is how to enable people to have that second or third way of getting where they need to go.
Right.
Like I say, going to Burbank is great as walk to the airport.
Yeah.
If I had to go to Burbank and get to, I don't know, go to a studio,
right,
how would I do that? And is there a way to make that transition easier?
So we do have free transfer agreements with nearly every bus public transit agency in Southern California, so there is the way to do it, but you have to really be inclined to say, I'm going to take that option. Now, whether it would get you to the studios, as an example, in Burbank, I don't know enough about the Burbank B bus or any, but there are options that are out there. And the other has been, we've talked about microtransit. This commission has heard about it. I know in Moorpark it's been launched. So those are other options. And in Los Angeles County, LA Metro has microtransit, and it's serving certain areas. So it's sort of the public transit Uber version. I mean, so there are those types of things, but you really have to be intentional about figuring that out. And it becomes easy for us to say, I'll just hop in the car. We've got to figure out how we continue to market that free connection or easy connection utilizing some of these other public transit options. And of course, Uber and Lyft are still out there too. And that's another opportunity. But that last mile, first mile is a big question. And on the safety side, when you get into downtown Los Angeles, I mean, that is a big issue. And there's a lot of ways you can get around downtown LA utilizing the subway system and light rail system. But if people don't feel safe, and they're going to be hesitant to use it. And so I think that is one of the biggest things we have to work on as an industry, is the sense of safety on transit.
Commissioner Crosswhite.
So there's a couple of large events that are going to be coming up in the next few years, the World Cup and the Olympics. What work is being done to prepare for those, and how might those be other ways that you can encourage people to start learning how to use transit now, in preparation for that, so that if they wanted to go participate, they might be encouraged to take a train, because by the time they get there, they know how to do it?
The World Cup is going to be an amazing test case for us. First of all, it's only got one venue in Southern California, SoFi Stadium, which weirdly doesn't have any rail transit to it now, nor will it have it by 2026. There will be ways to access it through public transit, just not by rail. But you'll be able to take our trains to get to Union Station and then sort of meander your way around. Again, the number of venues are not as complicated because it's going to one place. LA 28 is an entirely different conversation. And if there's something that keeps me awake at night, it is how in the world we're going to pull off what is going to be called a car-free games. And by car-free games, that means if you're a spectator or a member of the workforce at LA 28, you will not be able to drive your car to the venue. You will have to take public transit. Millions of people who have accustomed to driving to a location will not be able to do that. And the Metrolink system will be the backbone transit system for all of Southern California. We're going to have rail infrastructure in place to be able to pull that off. We're going to have double tracking. We have this great project in Commissioner Judge's community in Simi Valley where we're doing double tracking and new platforms and to allow us to have more frequency on the Ventura County line, and we're doing that throughout our system. So we're going to have capacity for trains. What we don't yet have is actually the equipment. And we have been in DC and Sacramento really banging that drum that if you want us to do this, if you want us to pull off a car-free games, then you better make sure that we have the train equipment to do that. Right now, if I were to order tomorrow, it would be really, really tight if I could get new equipment in 5 years, just the nature of time it takes to build this stuff. So we've already started having conversations with our sister agencies about utilizing some of their spares. The Caltrain organization I referenced earlier has some equipment that they're going to be surplusing. So we're looking at those types of opportunities. And we want to encourage people, whether it's for the World Cup, but there's not going to be a lot of encouragement required for LA 28. It is a mandate. And I have this sort of warped perspective on it. And that is, if we put together a great experience that people are able to use public transit when they had no other choice, this is our one shot in Southern California, not to mess it up, and actually be able to deliver a transit system. People go, huh, who would have thought? Because I think that's going to be the thing. I think it's going to be that, almost requirement. People will figure other ways around, but the rest of the world will be seeing a Southern California transportation network that's going to be handled in a certain way, and it's a combination of both from an environmental perspective, but the bigger issue is a security issue at venues. That's why the car-free games is going to be in place. So, Commissioner Crosswhite, I mean, it is something that we're looking at. And again, I look at this like we can't. We got one shot. So yeah, it does keep me awake at night.
Maybe starting to advertise, you're not going to be able to drive your car to get there, so you better start practicing now.
Yeah, learn now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just follow up on that comment a little bit. I don't know how many of you went to the Strawberry Festival a weekend or two ago, but to those friends of mine that went up there, they told me the traffic was absolutely brutal. And so I've since reached out to Mr. Kettle, Mr. Jewell at Losan, and also the Strawberry Festival board saying, you need to use trains. You need to schedule trains, get them running a special train for you, and make it available for people to come in from outside areas to try and mitigate that. Because my understanding is that sometimes to drive a mile or two in Ventura was an hour effort on public streets. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Any other comments for Mr. Kettle? Commissioner Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 or 4 things. First of all, I'm really privileged to sit on the Metrolink board on behalf of our commission, and I want to give high compliments to Darren as the CEO. Talk about an extremely difficult and challenging operating environment for Metrolink. Given, on the one hand, you have the financial constraints and the loss of ridership and the fiscal cliff, which we're focused on in the PowerPoint, and on the other, you have the expectations of public transit. You have the expectations of regulators. So, for example, the California Air Resources Board with respect to the recent CARB rules. So it's kind of like simultaneously playing multidimensional chess and having you used the word crystal ball. I was thinking of Ouija board, but that's more of a spirit board and communicating with the spirits on how public transit's going to do. But it's like trying to do crystal ball and playing multidimensional chess. Second thing is I've taken notes. Thank you to all the commissioners for your comments specifically, because I've taken notes on them all and will remind myself about them during meetings. A couple of comments. First of all, one of the focuses of the Metrolink board, it's not just youth, it's multi-generational. So you have seniors and leisure travel as well. So speaking as a senior who's going to take Metrolink down on the Orange County line tomorrow, that is a way, and that is a way to for Metrolink to go. And I think a greater portion of Metrolink's revenues are going to be derived from that. It's still not a huge amount, but it's something that you can build on. Commissioner White, with respect to public safety, notice up on that, can we go up the PowerPoint one more time to the Metrolink logo? There is a distinct contrast in safety between Metrolink versus Metro. And on Metrolink, the board recently adopted a long-term, multi-year contract re-up with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which is doing an excellent job relative to public safety on Metrolink's trains. And you'll note the last 4 letters of Metrolink. That is to distinguish Metrolink on the one hand from Metro on the other. And I'm not criticizing Metro, but Metro certainly has its public safety issues. One of the other real challenges that Darren goes through that also keeps him up until 3 a.m., or maybe he wakes up at 3 a.m., I don't know. But that's the capital funding versus the operating funding. You know, you have a lot of capital funding from the state, but you don't have the operating funding. And that's one of the purposes, if you remember Martin's and Sally's earlier slides on the potential for flex funding from the state, because we have such a tough year. I think the forecasting is a lot more realistic, so I really applaud Metrolink for employing far more realistic forecasting. Finally, you'll note, so the operations for VCTC, because I got my VCTC hat on, right, first and foremost. So the operations subsidy is about $16.3 million for next year. And then there's the capital request, which is just south of $14 million, if I recall correctly, about $13.9 million. So that is an increase. But one of the issues that I know that it recurs, and this is kind of my wearing my VCTC hat, Darren, to you as a challenge. One of the you saw the presentation on the working capital and the working capital policy, but one of the challenges has been from a financial standpoint and from an auditing standpoint, because typically Metrolink has been behind in capital invoicing. And that's something that I know that I'm hoping that you'll provide assurances to this body, Darren, that Metrolink and Metrolink's accounting staff will continue to work on that, because that lag time does impact upon VCTC's operations. And in any event, I hope that you provide that you can provide that assurance to this commission that we're going to solve that issue.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Tremblay.
Not to put you on the point.
No. I mean, the thing is that, you know, we have a few areas that over the last 5 years, I mean, I think we're cleaning up some things that have been, you know, historic challenges for Metrolink. I've said we need to do, it's sort of the basics. We got to do really well at the blocking and tackling. We got to do well at the fundamentals. And this is an area where, you know, just paying our bills on time and actually billing our member agencies for work so that we don't have that. That's something that we're working on. We do have a chief financial officer who I appointed in his role. We've been making steady progress on that. And I think one of the other elements of it is that we've really gotten much more heavy into the larger projects. And so we're still working through some of the kinks in that. But we're going to make progress. And obviously, if Ms. DeGeorge or Ms. Grasty ever have a problem and we're not getting responsiveness at Metrolink staff, they both still have my personal mobile number. They know how to find me. And not all four other counties can say that. So I hope that we can make sure that we're on the ball on that, so we're not putting, of all agencies, VCTC, the one that has, you know, because of your funding structure, need to have prompt payment and prompt billing, that we do that right. So yes, there's an assurance. We'll make it right.
And thank you, Mr. Kettle, and thank you, Mr. Chair, very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Kettle, for the presentation. Ms. Grasty, wonderful job on the introduction. Everything worked perfectly. So this is a receive and file. That'll be the direction. And that will take us to
Thank you,
item
Mr.
number
Chair.
11.
Thank you, everybody.
Santa Paula Branch Line Update, Budget Amendment, and Contract Award for Design and Environmental Compliance. And Ms. Fagan, before you talk, I do have one request to speak. What I'd like to do is have the speaker come up and speak ahead of the item, and then there's an opportunity for staff to make a comment. Fine, if not, staff can still introduce themselves to her afterwards. So, Ms. Stewart, and you'll have 3 minutes.
I didn't log in quick enough. It was there, now it's gone. Good morning, Commission. Thank you so much. I am a resident of the Sespe Creek area in Fillmore, California here. I am here today to talk about the rail car storage. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but Sierra Northern Railway has moved in about 100 cars to the base of my neighborhood. These rail cars are not welcome. They are bringing graffiti, which is blight, which is against a county ordinance. They are bringing gang turf wars, and they're devaluing our neighborhood. Our property values are going down. We moved to live in a beautiful, serene agricultural community, and we did not move to, I hate to say it, the ghetto, but that's what our neighborhood looks like. We no longer can see the beautiful Topa Topa Mountains as you drive along Old Telegraph Road, whether you're going to or from Fillmore to Santa Paula along that route. We being our neighborhood and community have made many efforts to reach out to Sierra Northern, and they will not respond to us. They are within their rights per their contract they signed with VCTC. And we didn't sign up for rail car storage. Our neighborhood did not sign up for that. This issue has not just been in our neighborhood. It is now transcending into the city of Fillmore. I have been in direct contact with the local sheriff's department there. They are seeing an uptick in graffiti as well. And I understand it's because the rail bridge is out, and those rail cars are only there because of the rail bridge being out. However, I don't understand why the commission cannot request Sierra Northern to move the rail cars a mile west, out of sight from the neighborhood in which we live, until that bridge is built and fixed. I understand they have a rail bike that they are now operating and are generating some income, but there's no give with regards to the railroad. They just have come in, and they are not good neighbors. Mr. Erickson says something about partnership. They don't want to partner. They got into the county, and they are doing whatever they like. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Long.
Yes, in comments before, you had talked about a petition. Could you elaborate on what that petition is?
I was trying to, I had it pulled up, and then I guess it had been off for too long. Let me see if I can pull that back up. Yes, I did start a petition on change.org. My service in here is not good.
But roughly, how many people?
So currently, I have over 500 signatures on the petition, and basically, in a nutshell, the petition is requesting VCTC, actually, I have not presented it to you yet, but will, to amend Section 2B, which is storage of the rail cars. And what we would like to see have the amendment changed would be to have the amendment say, no rail car storage within the Sespe Creek residential/agricultural area of Ventura County. Yeah, I'm not getting it to pull up, but thank you for pointing that out. So I do have over 500.
And presentations at our Santa Paula branch line?
I have. I was at the March Santa Paula branch line meeting, and I've also been up in front of Fillmore City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I would invite you to stay and hear the presentation, and afterwards I'll ask staff to touch base with you, just make sure that we have everything we need to try and be a good partner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fagan.
Well, good morning, Chair McDonald, and good morning again, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Amanda Fagan, and I serve as the Director of Planning and Sustainability here at VCTC. I'll start with a bit of background and context on the Santa Paula branch line, and though our last update to this commission occurred just in September, we do have a large number of new commissioners, so I hope you'll forgive the repetition on some of this background information. Then I'll share updates on current operations and activities, and finally provide an overview of the request for proposals and resulting contract selection for the reconstruction of the Sespe Creek Overflow Bridge, which was damaged approximately 5 months ago by a series of severe winter storms. VCTC acquired the 32-mile Santa Paula Branch Line Railroad and right-of-way in 1995 for use as a multimodal corridor that includes a trail, freight, and preservation of the corridor for possible future commuter rail service. In 2001, VCTC entered into a 20-year operating lease with Fillmore and Western Railway that expired in June of 2021. In developing a new railroad lease and operations agreement, VCTC established and followed an underlying principle that the agreement should provide for economic activity in the Heritage Valley by continuing to support rail operations and preserving the corridor for a future trail by dedicating the lease, license, and permit revenues generated by the branch line to the ongoing maintenance requirements, while avoiding the need to subsidize the operations of the line through public transit funds over the long term. With this basic premise in mind, the Commission approved the agreement with Sierra Northern Railway on December 16th, 2021. And since January of 2022, Sierra Northern has been responsible for operating and maintaining the Santa Paula branch line. Sierra Northern operates and maintains the railroad tracks and the full right-of-way and provides freight and film service. Tourist and excursion service are provided through the cooperation of a sister company, Mendocino Railway. The initial agreement is for a 35-year term with 2 30-year extension options. The railroad lease and operations agreement defines railroad purposes, including freight and transload, filming, storage, and tourist and seasonal passenger services. Mm-hmm.
On these services and activities, what is new from the contract from Fillmore Western to Sierra Northern on this agreement for property?
The agreement added, the new agreement added specified rail bikes, and I believe it also added the storage. Mr. Mattis, if you could help refresh my memory, if you recall. It's been so long since I looked at this.
Yeah, I would need to look at the prior agreement to confirm whether we added rail car storage in this one. I'll do that right now, see if I can
Okay,
get it.
if you could, and then also, it also includes the land use or the maintenance
Well, so one of the big differences between the Fillmore and Western agreement and the current agreement with Sierra Northern is that under the Fillmore and Western agreement, they were responsible just for the operating right-of-way, so the railroad tracks and the 15 feet of center line. Under the Sierra Northern agreement, Sierra Northern is responsible for maintaining the full right-of-way. Under the previous agreement, VCTC was expending significant staff and financial resources to take care of that area between 15 feet and 50 or 100 feet, depending on the width of the right-of-way. So the responsibility for maintaining the full right-of-way shifted to Sierra Northern. That's one of the major differences.
Thank you. I just think it's really important for our commissioners to understand the difference. There were some assumptions, but there's a lot of big differences based on these changes from the two contracts. Thank you.
That is correct. Thank you.
And Amanda, if I could just jump in here real quick to the point you made earlier, I think it's important to understand, and Darren Kettle referenced this earlier, that when rail lines are purchased, their maintenance costs are significant. This was a very old rail line when VCTC purchased it. So the intent was really to shift the responsibility of maintaining this very expensive rail line on to our operator, Sierra Northern, rather than have VCTC continue to subsidize that with money that is needed for public transit. So I just wanted to, that was probably the most significant change in the agreement itself.
So the local Sierra Northern team is led by the Ventura Division General Manager, Matt Blackburn. Matt couldn't join us today because of an active rail operation this morning to actually move some of the stored rail cars out of view of Old Telegraph Road. A resident is hosting a wedding for her son over the weekend, and so Sierra Northern was able to move their rail cars for the weekend to clear their view and worked with the resident to do that. So those cars were moved this morning. Since beginning operations, Sierra Northern has conducted inspections, made improvements to the condition of the signals and railroad tracks, conducts weed abatement and other right-of-way maintenance activities, and conducts rail operations on the branch line. VCTC staff and Sierra Northern representatives continue to meet on we meet virtually on a biweekly basis to coordinate activities, although most days I do end up talking at least by email with Sierra Northern almost daily. In the first 2 quarters of fiscal year 2022-2023, so between July and December of 2022, Sierra Northern replaced 381 railroad ties and 30 tons of ballast and continued to develop a new base of freight operations. Freight rail service reduces truck traffic at a rate of 4 trucks for every rail car and provides an opportunity to lower greenhouse gas emissions associated with goods movement. Also, in just the first 2 quarters of this current fiscal year, Sierra Northern expended over $670,000 in labor, equipment, materials, and services to maintain the Santa Paula branch line, with VCTC being responsible for reimbursing only $225,000 of that amount under the railroad lease, leveraging private investment in the branch line at a rate of nearly 3-to-1. In March of this year, Mendocino Railway launched the rail bike service on the Santa Paula branch line. Guided tours depart from and return to the Santa Paula depot with a stop at Prancer's Farm. The rail bike tours operate much the same way as an excursion train does, on a set schedule mounted on the railroad tracks with guides at the front and rear or caboose of the tour. Guests stay on the rail bikes at all times except during the pre-planned stops at Prancer's Farm and at the turnaround point, which is located west of Sespe Creek. Additional information on the rail bike operations is included in a fact sheet that has been posted to the new Santa Paula branch line webpage, which I'll discuss further on an upcoming slide. Last month, our Executive Director, Martin Erickson, participated in a site visit to the rail bike operations conducted by the California Public Utilities Commission Rail Safety Division. This allowed both VCTC and the CPUC to get a better understanding of how the rail bikes operate, particularly related to crossings and safety. The CPUC provided some really helpful recommendations to Sierra Northern, and they'll be and to Mendocino Railway, and they'll be reviewing and responding to those resulting recommendations from the CPUC inspectors. We also understand from Mendocino Railway that the tours that they've been operating have been very popular, and the weekend tours are booked out several weeks in advance, and they've been really happy with the marketing and the response and the results of that, bringing new folks to the Heritage Valley to experience their rail bikes. So Sierra Northern and Mendocino Railways continue to operate from a temporary base of operations at the former Santa Paula Hay and Grain Facility in Santa Paula. They've hired a local team of staff, and they work with local businesses to support contractors to supplement their workforce. The hay and grain lease is anticipated to support Sierra Northern operations for a period of 1 to 2 years, while Sierra Northern locates and prepares a site for a permanent home on the branch line. One other noteworthy tenant on the branch line that I'd like to share with you is Parallel Systems. They operate a testing site for its autonomous rail system and located east of Fillmore. So with respect to the issue that our speaker, Ms. Stewart, referenced earlier today, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about railcar storage. Railcar storage refers to rail cars that are owned by a third party being stored on the Santa Paula branch line. Railcar storage is anticipated to be used in these early stages of the Sierra Northern operations to help generate revenue, while other business lines are further developed. To mitigate the impact of railcar storage, the agreement prohibits railcar storage within incorporated cities and existing communities as defined by the County of Ventura, namely Saticoy and Piru, or within 150 feet of legal public and private railroad crossings, and prohibits railcar storage of railcars containing hazardous materials. As a result of the severe winter storms in January of 2023 and resulting damage to the Sespe Creek Overflow Bridge, approximately 100 cars are being stored in an unincorporated area west of Fillmore. The storage of these cars is temporary, and every effort is being made to repair the bridge and to restore service connectivity in a timely manner to allow the rail cars to be moved to another less visible location until they're placed back in service by the owner. So that being placed back in service could actually happen before the bridge is reconstructed. As the summer construction season heats up, the demand for this type of rail car is expected to increase. So it's quite possible that the rail cars will leave, at least many of them will leave sooner rather than later.
Can I ask a question? On that, when you're talking about temporary, how long has it been so far?
So they've been there since mid-January. The contract that Sierra Northern has with the owner of the rail cars extends through the end of this calendar year, and Sierra Northern has committed to not bringing any other, they have at least committed verbally to us that they won't be bringing any other rail cars for storage until after the Sespe Creek Bridge has been restored.
So this temporary storage is going to be a year or more?
It could be up to the end of December, up to a year.
And I just wanted to add in real quick, too, we've said this before, but I think it's important to understand that Sierra Northern entered this contract to store these rail cars before the bridge was washed away. So that this location that you're in right now was never the intended location. It's temporary and obviously very unfortunate for several reasons, but the intent was to store the cars further east and not in the area they are in.
Right, and I think the sensitivity to the residents is the fact that what temporary is considered. Temporary to me is like a couple days, we're going to get this done, we'll clean it up, but a year is not considered temporary to me at all. Thank you.
So I'll just mention too that revenue from the storage of rail cars contributes to maintaining and improving the condition of the railroad and the right-of-way. And the rail car storage also contributes to efficient and safe operations of the national railroad network. Passenger and freight cars and locomotives that are owned by Sierra Northern and the sister company, Mendocino Railway, may be parked on the railroad, including within incorporated cities, as part of regular railroad operations. These types of cars are not considered rail car storage. So before I move on to discuss the storm damage, I'd like to reiterate a few of the benefits associated with the railroad lease and operations agreement. Over the long term, the agreement reduces VCTC's financial obligations to operate the railroad and to maintain the right-of-way, reducing and eventually eliminating the need to subsidize rail operations with public transit funds, and leverages private sector investments to address deferred maintenance on the line, and activates the property to prevent and address trespass and other related issues. And while the transition to the new operator has definitely not been without challenges, with rail car storage, storm damage, and a need for improved communications certainly being front of mind, progress has been made towards the goal of an improved multimodal railroad corridor, with rail service, filmmaking, and trail planning underway. In an effort to improve communications and in response to requests to many requests for information on rail car storage and rail bike operations from members of the public and from our commission, VCTC staff prepared a new web page dedicated to the Santa Paula branch line. The page shares information on rail safety and access, rail car storage, trail planning, and rail bike operations. A GIS web map shows the VCTC-owned railroad parcels, and an online comment form and email address are available to collect public comments and questions. And that webpage can be found at goventura.org/gettingaround/SPBL. We've also created a new email address, spbl@goventura.org.
Is there also an opportunity to put rail bikes on this? I know there's a lot of concern. You said that the rail bikes is doing great, but I have to say there's a correction on that for all the ag land and owners that are there. That is not doing well. And so my office gets a ton of complaints on this, so I want to make sure people know that for rail bikes also, because you said it was a second business, that this information is getting for them as well.
So the rail bikes operate, there is a section of the web page that's dedicated to rail bikes, and there's also a link to both the Sunburst train information as well as a link to the fact sheet that staff developed about rail bikes operations. Those are all included on the website.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just, sorry to jump in again, but this subject has been occupying quite a bit of my life in the last few months also. And just to respond to Supervisor Long's comments, we are making a much more concerted effort to outreach to the property owners, the partners along the line. Frankly, that could have been done in a better way earlier, but we're trying to make up for that with providing accurate information about what exactly the rail bikes entail and to try to allay, I think, the concerns, the legitimate concerns of the ag community along this line. There are a lot of changes that are happening as a result of this new contract operation. In some cases, changes where rail freight activity hadn't been occurring for decades, and it's a learning process for us. But I want to make sure that we do everything we can to own and hopefully repair some of these relationships.
Well, and to bring it forward, the reason why I'm asking these questions to make sure that our commissioners are educated on this. There's a huge difference going from maintaining the land around the rail versus now Sierra Northern. And for whatever reason, but for example, underpasses to get to your farm, you have now ordinances and certain rules and regulations you have to follow where I think it was more of a handshake. You know, this is Ventura County. We're good. You know what? We're not bugging you. You're not bugging us. Let's go. So our farmers are having issues with that. And I appreciate Amanda Fagan and Martin trying to put resolutions to it, but those are types of things. Or there's fruit carts right next to the train station, well, or the train tracks, and they didn't know how much the rail is now being used. So there's a lot of different things that are going on. So I appreciate this presentation. I think this is wonderful for our education. I just want to know that there are a lot of things that these two are working on to try to resolve some issues, and not everyone is still happy. I just want to make sure we know that. So thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you, and if I can follow up and appreciate the comments from Mr. Erickson and the efforts from Ms. Fagan. And I've had a conversation with Supervisor Long about this issue. And so what I'm wondering is, this responsibility is falling on VCTC, but is there a local representative from Sierra Northern who can answer to some of the concerns and who can work alongside VCTC on this issue, since they do have this agreement in place, the operation and management? I mean, if that isn't out there, I think it's important for them to also be public-facing, given the issues and the concerns.
So the Sierra Northern's general manager for the Ventura Division is available, does take and return calls, maybe not as quickly as folks would like, because he is also responsible for operating the actual railroad. But we understand that Sierra Northern is also within their company, within their corporate structure, developing a community and government relations staff, and possibly bringing on a firm to support their efforts at improving communications with the community. We've also talked about scheduling town halls in both Santa Paula and Fillmore to provide that venue for Sierra Northern and Mendocino to interact more directly with the community.
Thank you, and I think that would be very important because I mean, if they're going to have this contract for the next 30 years, there should be a greater role and responsibility placed on them. So,
Thank you. So finally, before I shift gears and talk about the storm damage, I'll just share a couple of quick updates on the trail planning. In April of 2022, the Commission adopted a goal to reinvigorate the process to complete the Santa Paula Branch Line Bike Trail. Planning and design for the 4-mile section from the East Ventura Montalvo Metrolink station to Saticoy is included in the regional funding allocation for the Active Transportation Program Cycle 6. And we expect to hear any day whether the California Transportation Commission has recommended for approval the funding to actually construct that trail section as part of a suite of projects that VCTC submitted through the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. VCTC also submitted a grant application to the Southern California Association of Governments through the Regional Early Action Planning, or REAP program, County Transportation Commission's partnership program, to update the master plan and environmental impact report for the trail from Saticoy to Piru, looking at existing conditions, phasing plans and cost estimates, trail alignment to better serve housing and transit, and improve access to transit connections, conduct outreach to disadvantaged communities and neighboring landowners to address any concerns and build support for the project, and to evaluate and make recommendations for lighting and other tools to improve safety, alleviate neighbor concerns, and encourage the use of the trail and transit connections. We expect to receive a decision on funding from SCAG sometime this summer. So now on to the storm damage updates. The Suspe Creek Overflow Bridge is located at approximately milepost 423.44 west of Fillmore. The bridge was constructed in 1969 and has a total length of 450 feet, made up of 15 spans of 29 feet, 10 inches each. This aerial image shows the location of the bridge just west of the city of Fillmore and alongside Old Telegraph Road. On the early morning of January 10th, heavy rain, stream flow, and debris accumulated during a series of storms and washed out 3 spans, or approximately 90 feet of the bridge. 3 spans on the western end of the bridge were destroyed and require reconstruction to restore rail service. On January 14th, the President of the United States issued a disaster declaration for California severe winter storms, flooding, landslides, and mudslides, including Ventura County. It is anticipated that VCTC will seek reimbursement from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, for costs to replace the Sespe Creek Overflow Bridge. On April 7th, VCTC released a request for proposals for consultant services to assist VCTC to comply with state and federal environmental laws and permitting requirements, and to complete the design and engineering to restore the pre-disaster design, capacity, and function of the Sespe Creek Overflow Railroad Bridge. Given the urgent need to restore rail services and repair the bridge, VCTC is conducting an accelerated procurement process for the initial design and planning phase of the project. The goal is to commence design work on or about the 15th of June and to have design complete with plans and specifications and bid documents prepared in time for consideration for commission approval at the September 8th meeting. The scope of services requested includes compliance with state and federal environmental laws and permitting requirements, structural design and engineering, and development of plans and specifications to restore the pre-disaster design, capacity, and function of the Sespe Creek Overflow Railroad Bridge, consistent with Federal Railroad Administration, California Public Utilities Commission, and the Southern California Regional Rail Authority standards. Evaluate the potential for cost-effective design variations to mitigate future hazards, project management support services, and coordination with the railroad operator. Deliverables will include construction-ready plans and specifications, a memo documenting the identification and evaluation of potential design variations, including costs and benefits, and this is, of course, a requirement of FEMA. Construction bid documents, including a request for bids and a detailed cost estimate, and documentation of environmental consultations, permits, and compliance. So the RFP was posted to our contracts website and distributed to a long list of rail and bridge engineering firms. We initially were not planning to do a pre-proposal conference given the tight timeline, but we had several requests for meetings with VCTC, which are of course not allowed to accommodate during because of our procurement guidelines. So instead we scheduled a pre-proposal conference and had something like 27 participants. So there was a lot of interest in this project. Ultimately, we received 3 proposals as of the closing date on May 12th. Proposals were evaluated by a team of 4 VCTC and partner agency staff based on the criteria detailed in Section 6 of the RFP and as shown on this slide. Independent review by each of the 4 reviewers resulted in the same rank order across the 3 proposals, and the panel unanimously agreed to select RailPros as the highest ranked proposal. After this ranking, and in accordance with the architectural and engineering procurement rules, the cost proposal for the highest ranked firm was opened and reviewed. Negotiations were conducted, and the cost proposal was determined to be fair and reasonable. The RailPros proposal demonstrated recent relevant experience with emergency rail bridge reconstruction projects in California, very similar to the Sespe Creek Overflow Bridge. The proposal included a strong environmental review and technical aspects of the proposal, and included 2 certified disadvantaged business enterprises to conduct the geotechnical and the survey and mapping work for the project. The final award not to exceed price is $791,998. To incorporate the cost of the contract, an amendment is requested to the Santa Paula Branch Line program budget to increase expenditures by $492,000 in the consultant services category, And then to help us to manage the workload associated with the bridge reconstruction and other storm damage, the amendment also has a small increase to salaries, fringe benefits, and indirect costs for a total increase in expenditures of $522,000. And during item 7, I went through and read the revised recommendation, and it's also shown up on the slide. So unless you really want me to reread this whole thing, I will keep moving. As I mentioned earlier, the recommendation is slightly modified from the written staff report to correct some of the interfund transfer language that was based on a review by our finance department. In addition, staff recommends approval of the contract with RailPros for design, engineering, and project management support services to reconstruct a portion of the Sespe Creek Overflow Railroad Bridge in an amount not to exceed $791,998. And as a reminder, VCTC is working actively with FEMA to seek reimbursement for the costs to replace the bridge, including these engineering and permitting costs. What's also not included in the presentation today is all of the other damage that occurred to the Santa Paula branch line, particularly debris that accumulated along the line, lots of mudslides, trees, and other debris that accumulated and had to be addressed. The costs of the debris removal are estimated to exceed $450,000. So the damage to the branch line from the January storms was fairly significant and has required a lot of work by Sierra Northern and their team to address and bring the line back into compliance with federal and state rules and regulations and to make it operable once again. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Commissioners have any? Commissioner Johnson? And I'm proud of myself. I got you right this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fagan. You know, given some of the issues around the rail bike program, how has that affected our plan to have an actual bike path as well? Because I'm guessing that people riding a bike from Ventura to Piru will not have a chaperone to keep them on the bike path.
So the master plan and environmental impact report, as well as all of the subsequent studies that have been conducted for the bike trail, have acknowledged and sought ways to mitigate the potential impacts of having a bike trail running through the adjacent ag areas. And so, you know, these are long-known concerns. What I think surprised me, admittedly, was that the level of concern that would also come along with the rail bikes. In my head, I had always thought of them as separate, and the rail bikes being closer to the open air tourist trains that Fillmore and Western operated for 20 years on the line. So as you alluded to, they do operate on they operate on the tracks. They have have guides in the front and the rear, and so some of the concerns are not as I think are less significant than with a bike trail. And so when we actually do design and plan for the bike trail, we will keep those concerns front of mind and look at ways to discourage people from leaving the trail, whether that's through landscaping, fencing, signage, some of the more modern tools like sensors and lighting that can help to keep people on the trail. Also looking at the placement of amenities to discourage people from leaving the trail, such as restrooms and water stations. So we'll certainly keep all of those things in mind as we move forward with the trail planning. And so I hope that answers your question.
It does. I will share with my colleagues, you know, my concern with this was obviously the rail bikes and the bike path were some of the positives to come out from this. And certainly I know people that can't afford the rail bikes. It's very expensive. And And I'm not sure how anybody with land along there is going to feel, if they'd feel positive about having a public restroom along the bike path, given some of the situations we have in California with homelessness. If I could move on to a separate question, do we have a sense of a timeline for when we'd see more of a shift towards freight operations?
So Sierra Northern has been actively building the freight business. They have several new customers on the line. Most recently, the Limonera Agroman facility is doing some of their transfers of bark using the trains. So that is something that Sierra Northern is actively pursuing. That's to serve existing and future businesses throughout the corridor.
Thank you. And as we talk about in hindsight, maybe what we could have done better with the rollout, no pun intended, of the rail bikes. Are we looking ahead to what we need to do for those of us? Ventura is on the Santa Paula branch line. The freight operations are going to have some sort of impact. The more freight there is, the more of an impact there's going to be on Ventura. What are we doing now to make sure that as the freight operations increase, that we have the sort of cooperation and goodwill and buy-in that's going to be necessary as the freight trains have more and more of an impact along the corridor?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's certainly something that we need to spend some more time developing. As I mentioned, we did create the new branch line webpage and direct communication tools to make it easier for folks to find us. In the past, a lot of questions or concerns came in through rider comments, which, while they eventually reach the branch line staff, it's not the best way for the public to interact with us more directly when they have concerns about the branch line. So we have created that webpage, and some of the obligation will also be, or the onus will be on Sierra Northern to communicate, and I think it has been impressed upon them how important it is to be better at communicating with the public. And I think they are trying. I know as I mentioned, they're establishing a new government and community relations function within their company. So that's something that we'll continue to work with them on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Good. Any other questions or comments from Ms. Fagan? Commissioner Long.
Yes, I really wanted to let the commissioners know that we have been meeting with Martin and Amanda and the City Paula and City of Fillmore and my staff in regards to many of the resident issues that are going along. Also with the Ag Commissioner, and there's great concern, Commissioner Johnson, in regards to even a bike lane versus just the rail bikes because of spraying due to, our farming processes and the timing and so forth. I think there's great fear in regards to what is going to happen. If you've been in the pandemic, when you heard everyone's going to go to the punch bowls and what happened there, let me just give you a visual. That is a huge concern to all your ag land owners, that there's going to be trash, there's going to be waste, people are going to be defecating, there's going to be all sorts of things going on those ags that those community members aren't paying for, the land being worked, the food being made, all those processes. So there's huge concern on that, and I want to make sure I'm very frank with you on that. So I appreciate the Ag Commissioner being brought into this, and we are asking desperately to make sure that our stakeholders are engaged in this process. So I just want to state that. And so one question I had in regards to the branch line, the bridge being redone, is this company is extremely experienced with bridges that have been washed out, so we're not going to have to do it in 20 years or something like that?
One of the things we really liked about the RailPro's proposal is they did contemplate the future of the bridge, and developing the plans in a modular fashion so that they could be used again in the future. We could build it into our long-term planning to upgrade the bridge as it needed, so that you could avoid future impacts. And so, to answer your first question, yes, absolutely. This is a very well-experienced group that does a lot of work for MetroLink. They've done work for VCTC in the past as well on the Hahn Creek Bridge. Their primary business is rail engineering, and so they do have a focus on these types of projects. And so we, all four of the reviewers, which included myself and a member of my staff, as well as representatives from the Watershed Protection District and from MetroLink, we all agreed that this was the strongest proposal and would give us, that they could meet the timelines that we're requesting for the design work so that we can get the bridge replaced as quickly as possible.
Well, I appreciate hearing from our own Susan Arroyo stating that VCTC is using county to help with this. So if there's anything else we can do to make sure that this timeline doesn't get slid. I do know contractors will say 6 weeks, and then we have one on Bradley. If anyone goes Balcom Canyon, sorry, that's a county issue. That contractor is 6 months. And what that does for transportation and everything is really horrible. So anything we should do. The next question I wanted to ask is, we're having this presentation here, but how does this reach our residents? So the city of Fillmore, city of Santa Paula, and Piru, how do they get notified about what is going on in the timeline and so forth?
So we could give the similar presentation if it was, so desired by the two cities. All of the information is available, through the VCTC website, but we'd be happy to go out if the city councils would like to hear from us. I know that was done just recently for the ties study, and I don't mean to speak out of turn here, Martin, but I expect you would be okay with us giving a similar presentation.
Absolutely. I'm in regular contact with the city managers of both Fillmore and Santa Paula on this on a very regular basis, and we have offered that. So I think a combination of reaching out directly to the councils, again, the proposed kind of town hall information on this. So we will continue to do that and make sure we are making every effort. I think really it's, as you've brought up before, Supervisor, this stakeholder engagement, whether it's on this particular issue and on related issues like the proposal for the bike lane, we will continue to do that.
I would appreciate if you could reach out to those cities. It was reported to me again that we have people walking across that bridge as is, and I'm very concerned who's liable for that if someone was to get injured. And then also the information to the cities as to note that this rail is being used a lot more. Everyone is really going back for, it was Fillmore Western, this is what we do. It's a new age, a new business, and there's a lot of differences. So I just know that there's a lot more communication that is needed, and I am concerned about the people walking across the bridge for whatever dare or what it is. I know our sheriff is very supportive of trying to stop the graffiti and the other things, so I really appreciate the partnership there. I just was concerned about that one as well. Yeah.
I certainly share your concern about folks walking on that. That's terrifying, but it's also not a new idea. The Historical Museum shared this photo from not the exact same bridge, not from the overflow bridge, but from the bridge that's now a trestle bridge, I believe was built in 1916. So we believe that the current Sespe Creek Bridge was built to repair this one here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any more comments for Ms. Fagan? Okay, this is an action item, and remember that this was a request to amend by staff, so an amended motion would be in order.
I approve the amended staff recommendations.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Long, a second. Commissioner Enegren?
Engler?
Engren, I'm sorry. I had to blow it somewhere, so. At least you got the EN part right. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Chavez? Commissioner Crosswhite?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren? Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge? Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez? Commissioner McQueen-Lejean?
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay? Commissioner White? Chair McDonald?
Yes.
Vice Chair Levere?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I will take us item number 12, the zero-emission bus rollout plan. Ms. Grasty.
I would like to introduce Annalee Castillo, who will be giving this presentation, the project manager for this project.
Good morning. My name is Annalee Castillo. I'm the Zero Emission Technical Lead with Stantec and the project manager for this Zero Emission Rollout Plan. Thank you for having us today. We're really excited to present the final results and final report of this loan process. This is a Zero Emission Bus Rollout Plan, and it's in just with a quick overview, we're going to see the motivation behind this project, a quick review of the existing conditions and the process that we went through, make a recommendation, as well as the modeling that went under that. Then we will have specific recommendations for each of the service types of VCTC, as well as the final rollout plan requirements. So the motivation behind this started not only because it's required by the California Air Resource Board and the ICT regulation, but also as push of VCTC to be more renewable and sustainable. As you know, there has to be a compliance by 2040 to have 100% zero emission vehicles, and that starts with a 25% purchase requirement in 2026. And there needs to be a submission to ICTC by the end of this month with that compliant plan approved by the board. Two of the technologies that were evaluated with zero emission was battery electric vehicles as well as hydrogen electric vehicles. Both of those are electric in nature and zero emission tailpipes. So overall, the project took a very comprehensive approach into taking a look at what's commercially available, as well as an existing condition analysis, route modeling, and simulation of the current services for VCTC. Fleet technology selection that was done in coordination with VCTC staff, as well as a facilities and infrastructure requirement analysis completed by a financial assessment to have the final recommendations. VCTC is in a very unique situation. They have long distances and mileages that put difficult to transition as zero emission technologies with the current technology. There is also limited type of vehicles for cutaways and motor coaches, which is what VCTC currently operates. And in addition to that, they don't own their maintenance facility. So it's a very unique and challenging, but there has been a lot of disposition from the staff to make this work, and the recommendations will reflect that, as you'll see. So after the modeling and analyzing the requirements for the service as well as the best fit for the operational requirements, Stantec recommend the transition to hydrogen or fuel cell electric vehicles. Now, what they're currently acquiring 5 electric motor coaches. The recommendation is to operate those, and eventually when they have to be retired, to do the transition to hydrogen, as well as to start the purchase of hydrogen once there is a station available. And there is currently no 40-foot coaches that are available, but the ICTC does allow for an exemption if there is not a market-ready vehicle at the time of that it is required. For Valley Express, the recommendation is to do battery electric just because it's a smaller fleet, and there is also no commercial available hydrogen coaches, and there is not a nearby hydrogen station that will be able to support a hydrogen option. So this allows that while VCTC is currently procuring 15 new cutaways in 2025, that once the transition is needed, that they can be phased out in 3 different years to be spread out. Taking into account the natural retirement of the vehicles by being compliant with the ICTC regulation, VCTC will need to start acquiring hydrogen vehicles for the intercity in 2027, and that will have a full transition to zero emissions by 2040 by keeping in compliance with CARB. For Valley Express, because again, the new buses are coming in 2025, the new purchase wouldn't occur until 2034, and even with that, the full fleet for Valley Express will be zero emissions by 2036. Now, regarding the fueling and charging infrastructures, because VCTC doesn't own a facility, there will need to be a lot of collaboration and partnership with neighboring agencies. First, for intercity, right now in coordination with SBCAG, they're going to be charging at Goleta those 5 electric coaches that they're getting, and once there is also plans to have a coordination with Camarillo, and recently it's been approved to have charging stations at the Camarillo Metrolink, which also would allow for that coordination and cost sharing for those 5 vehicles while they're in operation. Once that fleet has to transition to hydrogen, there has been coordination with Gold Coast to refuel the vehicles at their facility in Oxnard. Gold Coast has actually planned and is already anticipating the demand of the VCTC fleet at this facility, and has been really open to that collaboration as well. Now with Valley Express, there needs to be further discussions with partnerships with the municipalities and other public locations to do the charging of those vehicles in that area. And we're anticipating the charges will be at least 60 kilowatts, which for the light duty is kind of like an equivalent of a fast charging for a Tesla. Or it could also be potentially a level 2 to complement the overnight charging. There has been analysis of the financial impacts over the 20 years of the implementation for these fleets, specifically for intercity. There is obviously a higher increase because of the purchase cost of the vehicles, but there is a bit of savings due to the maintenance and fuel that is anticipated. This doesn't account for any infrastructure. Instead, there is being kind of like premiums accounted for the fuel because there's going to be purchased in a different facility for the hydrogen. And for Valley Express, similarly, we don't anticipate charging infrastructure in this analysis. The biggest expense is also the higher price of these vehicles, but there is some savings anticipating because of the fuel and maintenance. Taking separately the analysis of the charging infrastructure, for intercity, we're expecting close to 1.5 million for just the charging and minor modifications, but it's obviously great options to collaborate and have price sharings with Camarillo, since they're going to be utilizing these charging stations as well. And with Valley Express, it's close to $1 million for the charging infrastructure, obviously depending on what potential location, as well as opportunities for cost sharing for both options. Now, because of this price tag and the increase in price, funding will be critical in this process. Fortunately, California has been very advanced on the different options that we have. The plan itself has pages of recommendations of the different options that VCTC will need to actively be looking after to cover the price difference between normal operations and these new technologies. In terms of training, there is also going to be a requirement of heavier involvement, not only because making sure that the operators that are being subcontracted and complying are able to maintain the vehicles, but have a more active role if needed to have vehicles being maintained by VCTC staff at some point. Similarly, the report highlights the different aspects of training, as well as opportunities for collaborations with other agencies like Gold Coast, Thousand Oaks, or other areas in the city that are already close to operating electric vehicles, and in Gold Coast's case, hydrogen vehicles. Another requirement for the ICTC is the analysis of disadvantaged communities. There are a couple of disadvantaged communities that are being served by the fixed routes in VCTC, so there could be a potential prioritization, prioritizing the deployment of electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles in these areas, and a full detail of that is also presented into the report. Now, in terms of the greenhouse gas analysis and the environmental benefits, over the 20-year timeframe of this transition, VCTC will be eliminating close to 9,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. And on the yearly basis, after that, that's equivalent to removing 187 passenger vehicles, and that is just from the tailpipe. That is not taking into account that every passenger inside of buses are also already eliminating a vehicle out of the road. And some final recommendations, we do recommend having joint SEP groups with SBCAC, for example, other facilities in the vicinity, other transit in the vicinity, to kind of like have a group agreement for the purchase of electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, as well as having that regional hydrogen fueling infrastructure strategy, not only with Gold Coast, but also advocate for a reliable source of hydrogen distribution. And lastly, be able to align with regional plans like the TIAS study, and being able to keep in mind that there's other goals beyond just the tailpipe emissions of these buses. Other key aspects is the change of management within VCTC. This is an involvement not only of the drivers, but kind of like widely for the agency. So it's really ideal to have a champion and a program manager that is keeping track of the performance, not only with the reporting for ICTC, but making sure that the partnership with the other agencies are aligned and going smoothly. We also recommend a potential steer committee or a task force, so keeping track with the updates of the technology and advancements in charging infrastructure, vehicle technologies. And lastly, being able to engage with the unions, operators, and maintenance staff to make sure that they are aware of this change. There's education and try to mitigate any potential resistance from their end. And I know that was a quick presentation, but I'll be open to any questions.
Any questions from the commission for our presenter or staff? Commissioner Long.
Hi, thank you. It was brought up to my attention a request or a question about ridership for the larger buses. This is a really expensive bus, like super expensive. Is this the size that we need, or can we downsize? I know everyone talks about, or a lot of people talk about, the blue buses on the freeway that are empty. And so if 40, if there's a 40-foot and we can go smaller and it's less expensive and it's using less fuel and all that, can we do that? And is the capabilities better in a smaller vehicle than a larger one? Was that looked into?
I can answer this question. So this study really looks at the fuel path for our vehicles and compares our current types of vehicles compared to existing. So it's really an apples to apples comparison. The short-range transit plan that is upcoming would be probably a better place to look at analyzing the vehicle types that we use. Pre-pandemic, yes, these buses were full. And so especially on the Coastal Express route, which these battery electric coaches, over-the-road coaches, will be deployed. And so it's quite possible that they will be full again. On the other routes, they haven't been as highly utilized. The ridership is lower and has always been lower on those routes. However, when you have a mixed fleet, it can be costly to the agencies to have different types of parts and different types of vehicles. And also these over-the-road coaches, because even if those have a lower ridership, all these vehicles are traveling further distances. But the SRTP would be a good place to evaluate what types of vehicles if they are the most appropriate for our routes. But this does an apples to apples comparison based on the types of vehicles we currently use.
Okay, so then is this the cart before the horse? I mean, I really appreciate this information, and it's good to know what the pricing and so forth is, but is it before we buy a bus, before we do that, is it better to understand the ridership and where we're going and the options?
Sure. So the ICT regulation is, has been set in stone, and so these plans have to be completed by the end of this month. So these vehicles, though, have historically been good vehicles for us. Yes, it's possible that you could look at, potentially low-floor buses, and this study actually did look at those. But they are few and far between. They're not manufactured that way. You'd have to get an OEM to reconfigure vehicles to do that. And then with the low floor bus, you would have the same types of issues that we currently have running these distances, which is comfort for passengers, the wear and tear on the vehicles, and the suspension issues because the vehicles travel so far. But we did look into low floor buses during this study. Also because they're more readily available for these technology types, but they were determined to be not quite feasible.
Okay, and then with ADA compliance, are the larger 45-foot compliant in that way, so passenger safety and all of that goes on? I noticed that the smaller trucks, those with ADA are closer to the bus driver versus the 45, which is not as close. And we have had issues with safety for those riders and then also the bus drivers. So I'd like to ask questions now before we spend money.
Certainly. Yes, on a over-the-road coach, yes, the wheelchair lifts are more difficult than they are on a low-floor 40-foot bus, which, like the Gold Coast bus, the ramp easily deploys, and those buses are lower to the ground, and that's a huge advantage of those types of vehicles, absolutely. For these types of vehicles, the lifts are the same for all the proposed types of battery electric vehicles. These ones that we're receiving from SBCAG are exactly the same as our current buses in terms of where the wheelchair lifts are deployed. There are there's one vehicle currently, it's a diesel bus, that has a vestibule in the front of the by the door where a wheelchair would sit there, and we have independently looked into that vehicle. We're not at the point where we would be retiring VCTC buses, but it's certainly something we have been planning to look into with the next purchase of our vehicles in the future.
Okay, and then the last thing, just trying to understand for our public, is what is the cost of a standard bus versus the hydrogen bus? What is that difference?
The difference between a diesel bus versus a hydrogen bus,
Or
or the
what we
difference between a
have.
40-foot bus versus a 45-foot bus?
What we currently have to what you want to buy.
For both, it's almost double the price for the 40-foot buses and close to 1.5 for the cutaways. That's why there is a lot of funding available right now. There is already $15 billion that have been allocated for funding of zero-emission vehicles within the last regulations. And then just an example, Gold Coast was awarded close to $12 million for the purchase of buses and their infrastructure. So they're subsidizing quite a bit of this through the funding.
And then if the buses break down, what's the operation, the maintenance? Do we get payments for that as well?
So our financial analysis consider the extended warranty for both of these vehicles. So that price difference was already accounting for that, and that double price already accounts for that extra extended warranty that will cover things like, the batteries or the fuel cell, which is the expensive part. If anything else breaks within the bus, will be pretty equivalent to what the currently vehicles are doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Engler.
Yes, thank you. TO Transit, we're kind of going the opposite direction a little bit because we're going to battery-operated and electric battery buses, I think mainly because our routes are shorter, our buses are smaller, so it seems to fit our needs up there a little bit better. And of course, the cost of the buses, as Supervisor Long pointed out, are 30% higher than just a basic battery-operated bus. And then we don't have the infrastructure right now for charging hydrogen. is our approach going to be compliant or, not compliant, but does it fit into your plan for buses?
So we all have been working together. I think there are different strategies. In our case, we're working with Gold Coast because our buses go this distance. They need hydrogen, and they're will be constructing a facility. But we have been working with all of the different cities as well. We have a zero emission bus subcommittee. And so other than these two services, Gold Coast and the intercity service, all others are electric. And so I think there'll be a good network where everyone, especially in the East County, can work together easily to support each other, I think, and especially in the cases of emergencies and that type of stuff. So I think we will work together well, and, we're partnering with Camarillo on the battery electric vehicles in terms of a fueling facility. So I think there have been good partnerships, and I think, everything will be in compliance, and certainly expensive hurdle, but I think, we're working together as much as possible in terms of providing funding for infrastructure and identifying funding moving forward.
Thank you. We're I'm sure you're aware, investing heavily in both solar and battery backup at our storage areas. So it's nice to know that we're on the right track.
Chair McDonald.
And I'm going to call for Commissioner Chavez. He has a question online.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Chavez.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Grassley, for the presentation and our consultants. It kind of aligns with Supervisor Long's comments in regards to the sizes. I guess ultimately what I want to know is exactly what we're trying to approve today. I know it says to approve the rollout plan, but when I was reading the staff report in the packet, it kind of just tells you pros and cons for hydrogen versus electric, and then it doesn't really give us direction as to what exactly we're rolling out. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, so there isn't a specific section in the final report that has the fleet recommendations where we go over not only the benefits of one versus the other, but the actual recommendation, and more specifically into the ICTC plan. The ICT plan, it has a section that is asking what is the select technology or the type of vehicles that are being purchased. So that with that in mind, what the board will be approving today is the actual ICT plan, which is going to be sent to CARB. But with also keep in mind that this is like a living document. Just because you approve today to say intercity will be hydrogen and Valley Express will be electric doesn't mean that cannot be a change or an update to ICT. And even with this, they're also, for example, approving the plan of starting to purchase hydrogen vehicles in 2027. But if the case is that these vehicles are not available, or that you decide to change to 40-foot buses instead of 45 or even 35-foot buses, then that could always be changed. In fact, the ICT plan doesn't really ask the size of the vehicle that you're purchasing, so we just specify that it's a motor coach hydrogen in 2027, for example. So I think in that case, you might not even have to submit like a modification to it. And so in essence, that's what you guys are approving today is the ICT plan, which will be sent to CARB, keeping in mind that this can always be modified. And, I've seen plans where people say we're buying zero-emission vehicles. They don't even say if they're going to buy electric or hydrogen. They're just committing to saying we're thinking about it, we're going to be proactive, and we're going to comply with the 25% purchase of zero-emission vehicles starting in 2026. So that's basically what you guys will be approving today. Anything else you want to add?
I appreciate that. I know I made these comments before about the particular sizes of our buses and the need for possibly looking at 40-foot buses, and even taking a page from Foothill Transit where they have regular low-floor 40-foot buses, but the seats that they use are like more of a motor coach seats, and how we potentially should be looking more into that. I think about my experience as a transit operator for 10, 11 years, and assisting ADA riders, utilizing the ramps. or lifts, because those are two different ones. A ramp is a lot more easier, and it can still be operational even if there's a mechanical issue. You can still deploy the ramp and not prevent that rider from boarding the bus. Versus a lift where, depending on the type of model, what you're going to end up looking at is, are you able to manually deploy that lift, manually lift up that rider to the proper height so that they're able to board and exit the bus. So I feel that when we're looking at these things, that we're looking at the type of bus that we're offering and kind of get into something that is going to be able to benefit us long term. I know it's been mentioned that the buses that we currently use now have done well, but we need to think long term, and I think low floors is ideal and probably the most best path for us. In terms of hydrogen versus electric, I can honestly tell you during my time with Metro, when we try to go all electric on one of our bus lines, it was a total mess. Infrastructure for electrifying was done by one company. Manufacturing of the bus was done by another company. The arm charging stations done by another company. 3 different companies trying to communicate with each other and ensure that the system works properly was an issue. I remember one time we had a heavy storm that knocked out about 67% of the electric bus fleet because they couldn't charge and there was failures with the system. I understand with the whole hydrogen being more expensive and people's concerns with that, but when you're looking at it, and I encourage everyone and representatives from Gold Coast, they already know, speak to the operations manager from Gold Coast, because he'll educate you on the benefits of hydrogen and how it actually is performing a lot better than electric buses. So I just wanted to make those comments that I understand with the whole thing with the Coastal Express going electric because of Santa Barbara's grants, but at the same time, it concerns me that we're going to have these electric buses and nowhere to charge them at. But then my understanding of what I saw in the staff report is that there's a possibility of speaking to Camarillo to create a charging station so that they're not so far out. Take it from me again, I have the experience of operating those electric buses and seeing them come from day one up until even today, they're still having issues with their electric buses and the infrastructure. There's just so many issues with that, and I would hate for all of us to put our ducks in one basket and then at the end doing what Foothill did and get rid of all their electric buses and move to hydrogen. So something to think about, and thank you again for the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Erickson, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Did Commissioner Tremblay have a comment first? I don't know. No.
I did.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In light of Commissioner Long's and Chavez's comments, and in looking specifically at the executive summary, one thing that concerns me about this plan is I do not want it to lock VCTC into a specific implementation methodology. So I would propose that the last paragraph of the executive summary be revised. What it says right now is, throughout this there's 2 sentences, and I want to revise the second sentence. The first sentence says, throughout this document, information is provided that corresponds to the required sections of the ICT ZEB rollout plan. I'm sorry, there's 3 sentences. That's the first one. I don't want to change that one. The second sentence says, taken together, this plan is a living document that is intended to provide a practical framework for VCTC to deploy and transition to ZEBs in response to CARB's mandate. Don't have a problem with that one. Here's where I've got the issue. The third sentence says, like any other strategic plan, the implementation and transition plan should be revisited and adjusted in response to funding realities, changes in service delivery, and the needs of VCTC and its ridership, particularly given the long-term 20 years outlook. I don't think that's strong enough. I don't think that gives VCTC the flexibility. So therefore, I would move, that when the time is right, Mr. Chair, that the board approve the zero-emission bus rollout plan, but that the final sentence of that executive summary states as follows. VCTC intends to periodically revisit and, in its discretion, adjust this plan in response to funding realities, changes in service delivery, optimal vehicle types and lengths, and the needs of VCTC and its ridership, particularly given the long-term 20-year outlook. And I'm happy to give Mr. Mattis, because I didn't draft that out, but I stated that for the record, for purposes of a motion. And I don't think that would bother CARB in the least.
No, we'll be happy to update that. And actually, what you have to send to CARB is just the ICT plan. So you could even approve the ICT plan today, and we can update the final report, because that would be internal for VCTC use. So, but we'll be happy to make that change.
That certainly sounded like an amended motion to approve, so I would accept that if there's a second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Judge. Mr. Erickson, did you want to make a comment, or? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Johnson, I apologize.
Thank you. In talking about the length of the buses, I certainly know this from Gold Coast that the hydrogen fuel cell buses certainly have a much greater range than the battery electric buses, but still quite a bit lower than the diesel buses. And I note that you figure that hydrogen fuel cell buses would work for about 86% of our routes, and to go beyond that, we'd have to purchase more vehicles. If we went with the 40-foot buses, would that impact the ranges and the number of vehicles we would need to have?
So I just want to clarify, you don't necessarily have to buy more vehicles. What we recommended is to have a midday refuel. So once the vehicles are going through that they can have, either a 4 p.m. or refueling, which is feasible because they only take about 10, 15 minutes to do so. But we do anticipate that with the smaller buses, you will get a little bit of a better range. It is still hard to say because there is no 45-foot buses or even 40-foot motor coaches that we can say with certainty that's the range. So we were very conservative in our assumptions, and we try to validate with data of other vehicle types as well. But as a general rule, they're going to be a little bit lighter. They want to have less people inside the vehicle, so that would increase the range. And then there is other recommendation. There is a specific modifications that you can request to the manufacturer to have standard tanks are 37 kilograms, so you can request manufacturers to have a tank that is 50 kilograms, and that would eliminate the need of having midday refueling, and that could also be added to the 40-foot buses if you go that route.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Enegren.
You mentioned that the hydrogen buses are about twice as expensive as the diesel ones. But when you evaluate the whole program as written with potential cost savings in fuel and so on, and also infrastructure being put in, what does that do to the bus program's, cost?
Over the 20 years?
Yeah, after this whole investment goes in, what is it like compared to the diesel program we have right now?
Yeah. So the financial analysis will have the details, but in total, the base case for the intercity is close to $63 million over the 20 years, and for the zero-emission buses is $76 million. So you're not necessarily like duplicating the cost, but there is a gradient in that. Over the lifetime of the vehicles? Yeah, so with hydrogen, we're anticipating there's going to be it's like they call the curve of commercialization. So they're anticipating that the first 5 years, the vehicles will have a steady cost because they're trying to increase the market. And past that, they do anticipate an increase, kind of like natural, like, vehicles get more expensive year by year. So we took into account that diesel will get more expensive and that hydrogen after the 5 years will start getting more expensive as well. Yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned that there's grants for a lot of this.
Yeah.
We all know that grants come from somewhere. Tax money. Raising taxes all the time, so just want to put that out there.
Hey, I want to make a quick comment, and I'll go to Commissioner White. The interesting thing that I found out about the hydrogen technology is that Southern California Gas Company, along with Gold Coast, is working on proposals where the gas company can actually commingle the hydrogen and the CNG into the same delivery system, which we already have at Gold Coast. And then we get a separator, put it at the end of the system, we can separate it out and take what we need. And that saves us huge amounts of dollars on an infrastructure to get the fuel to the location, because it's already there. It's in place. Same thing with electric. You know, if you're going to go to an electric model, you have to create that infrastructure to get the electricity in sufficient strength to the location to charge buses. So there's a lot of other moving parts to these things. You know, okay, hydrogen, we use it, but do we have to build a whole new technology? And it doesn't look like it at this point, but it's still a growing trend. Commissioner White.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my concern with this is, with all the conversation we're having and things like this, Commissioner Tremblay talked about periodically looking into this, and I'm just wondering if we can be more specific than periodically. I don't know what periodically means.
Well, I considered phrasing it as annually, Commissioner White, but I didn't want to put VCTC in that position where it had to bring it back on an annual basis between now and 2040. I just thought periodically would be as determined as appropriate through the chair and the CEO. So that's why I used the word periodically.
Okay. I like the word. It's just,
I can tell you that we will be coming back to you periodically, whether that's every 6 months or sooner. I just would quickly note, we brought this item in February, had substantive discussion about it. We are trying to meet this CARB mandate that was passed by CARB in 2018. It was never voted upon by anybody in California, but these are the mandates that we have to go forward with. We are not going to decide today what type of buses we're choosing. That will also be brought back to the Commission in detail, length, probably mostly hydrogen, et cetera. But we're trying to meet this CARB mandate with this document right now, but it will not determine the actual bus we will buy, and we will come back with substantial detail for the Commission before that decision is made.
okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, we do have an amended motion on the floor in a second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Crosswhite?
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren?
Yes.
Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Judge? Yes. Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez? Yes. Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune?
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Chair McDonald?
Yes,
Vice Chair Levere?
he had to leave.
Thank you.
Okay, we're finished with that one. Item 13, approval of Transportation Development Act, also called TDA, Triennial Performance Audits for Ventura County TDA recipients. And the staff members are Dolores Lopez and Aubrey Smith.
Dolores is out, so last presentation, I'm introducing Kathy Chambers to give this one.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Chambers. I'm here representing Moore and Associates to briefly present the results of the TDA Triennial Performance Audits for fiscal years 2020 through 2022. So a little background, regional transportation planning agencies such as VCTC are required to conduct triennial performance audits for all recipients of Article 4 funding under the TDA, and audits of Article 8 funding recipients are encouraged. This engagement included audits of VCTC and the 10 transit operators to which it allocates TDA funding, and it included both Article 4 and Article 8 recipients. The audit process itself is pretty straightforward. We start with data collection and do an initial compliance review of each entity. This is followed by a site visit and interviews. For transit operators, we include a verification of performance indicators. For the RTPA, we look at the regional goal-setting role. We perform a functional review based on the functional categories for transit operators and RTPAs as identified by Caltrans in its Performance Audit Guidebook. We then prepare draft and final audit reports. Once the draft reports are prepared, each entity has the opportunity to review its report and provide any additional information regarding any of the findings. This year, there were several actions taken by the entities between the site visits and the completions of the audit drafts that enabled us to clear some findings from some of the reports. Findings from both draft and final reports were presented to Transcom at its April and May meetings. The COVID-19 pandemic was, of course, a significant factor during the audit period. This did result in the passage of legislation that provided regulatory relief through Assembly Bills 90 and 149. The federal government also passed legislation that resulted in emergency funding sources such as the CARES Act and CRISA. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to start out with a look at countywide ridership trends. This includes all of the operators that we reviewed as part of this audit. The overall countywide trend was very similar to that of the individual operators, with a steep decrease in ridership in fiscal years 2020 and 2021, and some recovery observed in fiscal year 22. So this was the case for both fixed route and demand response services. It's a little harder to see on the demand response line because it's not as, the numbers aren't as great, but the trend is still very similar. So while ridership is returning, it is slow to do so for many of the operators. Also keep in mind that this is the figure for the end of fiscal year 2022. We've had a number of months of almost the entire fiscal year 2023 since then, so that number will have changed, and there will have been likely more recovery since that number was posted. So this chart illustrates how ridership in Ventura County compares to nationwide trends. As you can see, what Ventura County as a whole has been experiencing is very much in line with what has been experienced nationwide with respect to ridership decline and recovery. When I ran these numbers, I expected similar trends, but I was a little surprised that they tracked so closely. And so what is going on in Ventura County is very representative of what's going on throughout the country. So here we have an overview of the findings and recommendations for all the entities audited. I'm going to skip around a little bit from how the slides are displayed since there are some commonalities in some of the recommendations. So the majority of the findings are functional in nature. There were only 2 compliance-related findings. The first one was for VCTC Intercity regarding how full-time equivalent employees are calculated for reporting to the state controller. They didn't quite use the TDA definition, and so our finding was that it needs to use the TDA definition. The City of Camarillo had the same finding, but since the City of Camarillo did not receive any TDA funding during the audit period, it was included as a finding but not identified as a compliance finding. The other compliance finding was for VCTC as the RTPA, and it carried forward from the prior audit. It recommends adding an annual review of the implementation status of performance audit recommendations as part of a more effective productivity review. Implementation of this recommendation following the prior audit was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're bringing it forward, and staff intends to get it implemented at this time. Several findings related to the impact of the driver shortage on the operator's ability to operate their transit programs. This was primarily noted with respect to the demand response programs operated by the City of Thousand Oaks. The city has taken some significant steps toward reducing its driver shortage, but it still remains a concern. And so this was included as a finding for Thousand Oaks, Moore Park, and ECTA. 2 additional findings pertain to data reporting. The City of Ojai continues to struggle with accurate data reporting, though this has improved. We recommended ensuring reports are reviewed by both transit and finance staff to identify any concerns about the data or instances of misreporting. The other finding identified some apparent reporting errors by Gold Coast Transit District in its state controller reports, specifically regarding vehicle service hours and vehicle service miles. Some of those errors had been corrected when the data was accessed through the state controller's website, but others had not. And so this is another instance where additional review of the report prior to submittal would help catch some of the misreported data. And finally, 3 operators, the County of Ventura, City of Simi Valley, and Valley Express, had no findings at all. And so that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for the presenter? Seeing none, this is a dual request. One is to receive and file the report, and the other one is to approve submittal.
I'll motion.
Pleasure of the commission.
I'll motion to approve, and thank you for this information. I think it's very valuable for us as we're assessing everything, changes and so forth, so I appreciate that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Long, a second. Commissioner White?
Second by me. I just want to thank the staff for all the work they've been doing on this. This is a major project that has taken quite a bit of time from the staff to do, and just to appreciate the clarity of it. Thank you.
And you're willing to second, or?
Yes, please. Yes. Second.
Okay, Mr. Tremblay, any comments? Madam Clerk, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Chavez,
Aye.
Commissioner Crosswhite,
Yes.
Commissioner Enegren, Commissioner Engler,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Judge, Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez, Commissioner McQueen-Lejeune,
Yes.
Commissioner Tremblay, Commissioner White,
Yes.
Chair McDonald.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. That takes us to the final countdown. General counsel reports. Agency reports, Southern California Association of Governments, Commissioner Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make this quick. I would recommend that you all go to connectsocal.com, or it's actually, connectsocal.org, and do the survey there. I think there's a couple days left on the survey. If you haven't done it already, I know this was announced a couple months ago, but this is a survey for our Connect SoCal from SCAG. Also, the bike path that we were talking about earlier, the staff is trying to get SCAG to help with funding. If you need any help from me, let me know, because that's perfect. It fits right with the Go Human philosophy of SCAG right now, and it's something it's a no-brainer for them. Other than that, I have nothing much else to report. There's been a lot of stuff going on, but we covered the electric buses ad nauseum today, so I don't have to go over that again. Thank you.
Thank you. Southern California Regional Rail Authority, also known as Metrolink, Commissioner Tremblay.
Thanks, we're good.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Los Angeles, San Diego, San Luis Obispo Rail Corridor, LoSAN. I'm going to defer to Commissioner White because he was at the most recent.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we had some discussion, obviously, about the track opening down south, and there was quite a bit of discussion about that, and also the strategic plan. Our next meeting is June 19th. Thank you, sir.
That was quick. Coast Rail Coordinating Council, there is no report. California Association of Councils of Governments, Commissioner Johnson.
We haven't met at CalCog since my last update, but I'll have something to say next time.
California Vanpool, Commissioner White.
Again, much discussion about the railways going up and down, even though these are van pools. And our next meeting is going to be it's going to be next Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our business. Mr. Erickson, with your permission, we will adjourn to 9 a.m. Friday, July 7th, 2023. Thank you all.